Hello, everyone. I'd like to call this special meeting of council for April 27th to order. Council, any additions or deletions to today's agenda? Councilor Race.
Sir, I'd like to add minute with council to the agenda.
Okay, minute with council. Council, any other additions or deletions to today's agenda? Seeing none. Administration?
No changes. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Olson. Council, with that, I'll entertain a motion. Councilor Nelson.
Move that council adopt the special meeting of council for April 27th, 2021 as amended.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Seeing none, I'll call it to question. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. That'll bring us to our minutes with council. Ms. Anderson.
We have 3 individuals registered today. Maureen Harper will be number 1. Jan Vasputen will be number 2. And Marie Soleil Pinet will be number 3. And I'm going to admit them all at the same time, and they will wait until we recognize them.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. And with that, we'll go to our first minute with council. I welcome Maureen Harper. The floor is yours, or Bill. I'm not sure who's there.
Hello. Yes, I am.
The floor is yours.
Hello, Mayor Michaels and councillors. After discussions recently with all councillors and Hinton citizens, I will be presenting you with 3 options regarding what we believe would solve many of the problems related to the bridge at Maxwell Lake. The first solution involves lowering the height of the bridge, removing the unsightly railings, replacing them with attractive wooden ones, and covering the flooded areas of the gravel pathway with a slightly raised, gently sloping boardwalk. The main advantages to this would be the potential for cost savings, aesthetics, accessibility for all, and its appeal to citizens who want a footbridge in that location, not a road. Vehicle access, which would not be allowed, is available at several other locations. Our second proposal, which is being discussed with all of you, would be to remove the present bridge and not replace it. Instead, slightly raised boardwalks and viewing areas could be installed on either side of the channel where water enters Maxwell Lake, or removal of the gravel pathways to allow the wetland to return to its original natural state. The third proposal is removal of the bridge and replacement with an attractive footbridge with slightly raised wooden boardwalks as approaches. A water leveling device in the beaver pond would be recommended for all 3 proposals. We have contacted every one of you with more details about each of these proposals, while pointing out the need for citizen input on this contentious issue. We encourage you to seriously consider our proposals and follow up with your own research before making a decision. I'd like to end with a short quote. You don't change other people's minds. They do. You provide the information to make it happen. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hare. We appreciate options and insight on elaborating what's in front of us with the report. So that's very much appreciated. And thank you for your time. With that, I'll go to our second one for this evening, Mr. Jan Vasputen.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Thanks. Yeah, so Jan Vasputen, president of Hinton Disc Golf Association. I'm not here to beg or plead for anything. I just wanted to discuss a couple points that were happened at the last meeting on this. Councillor Stashik said a couple things that I wanted to touch on. He said that currently we're paying $700 insurance. That's not right. We're not paying anything for insurance right now. He also said that the increase in insurance wasn't taking money away from us because we're not receiving money at this time. I would argue that that is incorrect as well, depending on how you look at it. For our first draft agreement, we calculated the operations and capital needs to be $8,000. We were told by the town that we would need a level of insurance. We never received an official quote, but we were told it would be between 300 and 700. So maybe that's where Albert got that number. So we were asked if we could live with taking that out of the calculated $8,000, and we said yes, mainly to get things done with. So then this agreement was brought to council and it was put in budget, i.e. we had come to a certain level of agreement. But it was after that that the town came back and said, well, actually, we're going to need you to get 3 times as much insurance, up to $2,100. And that this would have to come out of the 8K as it was already budgeted. So yes, considering that this increase came after our agreement to budget for $8,000, I would argue that this is taking money away from us. Just in the sense, I'm not, if this had happened in the right order and mistakes weren't made, we would have been putting in for $10,150. We're just trying to keep this thing going without burning out core volunteers and hopefully in time make it better. No one can argue that disc golf is the fastest growing recreational activity in Hinton right now. And at shoulder seasons like this, with mud replacing snow and greens not being green enough, I would argue that disc golf is the most played sport in town right now. There are times in the evenings when fairways are packed with people of all ages enjoying the free COVID-safe activity. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Vasconen, much appreciated. And with that, we'll go to our third and final minute with council for this evening. Marie-Soleil Pinet, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. I'm here as a citizen, and I just want to share my opinion regarding the bridge, the proposal from today. And I don't have any real solutions like Bill or like other people that I'm sure have really great ideas in town. But I'm just wondering if the council and admin actually had a vision about that bridge and how to actually access this. I just feel that we're missing the vision here, and we're just going through, we get grant and we're going to big engineer firm, and that, like, I don't know, they just draw stuff that worth lots of money, but didn't bring like Hinton vision with them. And I'm just hoping for that. I'm just hoping to get have a better vision. And I'm wondering also if this grant opportunity can be used in multiple projects and maybe fix that bridge on that connect Thompson Lake and Eaton Drive, and use part of it for that and use part of it to actually access this bridge on Maxwell Lake. And finally, I just would like to ask, generally speaking, if other projects in the area have been looked at, like Kelly's bathtub. The bridge has been replaced, and I would believe that it's within a wetland as well. The way, I don't know anything about all the details, but in my opinion, it should be related to wetlands. So it would be interesting to see how much they spent and what they did. It seems to be from a local contractor as well. I've been calling Hinton home for almost 10 years now. I'm pretty proud of living here, and I'm just hoping for keeping the good work and having like a nice environment to live in. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marie-Soleil. I'm sure a lot of these comments and suggestions will play a role in the conversations that probably won't be short either tonight and other nights. So it's much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Soleil. All right, with that, that'll bring us to our action items for this evening. The first one is the 2021 Hinton Community Grant Program funding, and I'll turn it over to CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This item is before council tonight following a discussion at the standing committee meeting of April 13th, 2021, where committee recommended that council approve allocating $60,000 from the ATE reserve to support the 2021 community grant program through 2 intakes. An additional consideration that's included in the recommended action for this item tonight is in the 3-year cap on the use of the grant for operational funding. Due to the impacts of COVID and the pandemic, some applicants to the CGP may be seeking support for operational costs, though they might not meet that criteria. The community grant program has been added to the agenda tonight in order to provide a full month to the intake process through May. So should council approve the recommended actions tonight, advertising can begin and notice to the community of the intake can start, and any changes to that eligibility piece can be communicated. I do have Ms. Way on the line. She's running the YouTube tonight, so it may take a moment if there's questions that need to be directed in, to her, for her to join us to provide those answers. Just a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you, CA Olson. Council, any questions or directions? Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question to administration is, does the support for this recommended action, does it potentially place the ATE reserve or operations in any kind of danger of being underfunded moving forward through this year? Again, with a failure to collect tickets and that sort of thing on the part of the contractor?
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. CA Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. There's no jeopardy to what's planned for 2021. The amount can be achieved through the reserve at the levels that it's at right now. A future report with plans to take a look at the ATE program and make some changes potentially, and how that discussion with council is forthcoming in the fall.
Thank you, CA Olson. Councillor Magoon, anything further for that? Thank you. Council. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to move that council approve allocating 60,000 from the AT reserve to support the 2021 community grant program in 2 intakes, and that council direct administration to waive the 3-year cap on operational funding for both intakes of the community grant program for 2021. And if I could speak to it, we spent a lot of time on this a week ago or a couple weeks ago, and opening it up to operations, I think is important for our groups right now. And I just look forward to having providing a little bit of support as a council and as a town to so many of the groups that do great work in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions or debate? Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, just very briefly, Your Worship. I think it's important because it's something we haven't traditionally done in the past to speak to the second part of the motion. I'm very much in favor of this. As Councillor Nelson said, there's a lot of really good organizations in our community who are struggling to do work that benefits, so many people who live in our town. So therefore, with the understanding of what COVID's done and what organizations are feeling, I'm very happy to support this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council. I'll also be speaking highly in favor of this, and I do really appreciate the second part to this. So nothing more to add besides what my colleague said. Council, anything further before I call this to question? Seeing none, I'll call to question that council approve allocating $60,000 from the ATE reserve to support the 2021 community grant program in 2 intakes, and that council direct administration to waive the 3-year cap on operational funding for both intakes of the 2021 community grant program. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this action item this evening? And seeing none, we'll go to our second action item, and that is the proposed Hinton Disc Golf Course Operating Agreement. CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. During the standing committee meeting of March 16th, council received the proposed Hinton Disc Golf Operating Agreement and provided direction to bring the agreement to a future meeting of council for decision. The proposed agreement supports council's approved budget of $8,000 annually with a modification to the ratio, of funding between operating and capital set at 4,000 for operating and 4,000 for capital. So different than the first iteration of the agreement that council received. The recommended action tonight is for council to approve the Hinton Disc Golf Course Operating Agreement between the Hinton Disc Golf Association and the town of Hinton as it's presented with that 4:4 ratio. I do have Ms. Howard and Mr. Von Claveren here tonight to assist in answering any of council's questions.
Thank you, CA Olson. Council. Councillor Nelson, then Councillor Magoo.
I'd like to make a motion that the disc golf agreement be amended to reflect a total town contribution of $10,150 with $5,000 utilized for capital and $5,150 for operations. Were we able to capture that?
Yeah, I just have to make a few changes with my typing.
Counselor Nelson, are you good with that wording?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. Yeah, if I could speak to it, ultimately we, during budget process, approved a service, and later on the service is costing a little bit more. So to me, I look at the overall return on investment and the number of people that are using that course and the maintenance and upkeep that they're doing. I think it's still a really good spend of an extra $2,150. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Counselor Magoon and then Counselor Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and really my question is just to that split that Counselor Nelson just suggested through amendment, which I'm very supportive of. I just want to make sure that this split is appropriate for the needs of the Disc Golf Association. Understanding that it's a near, I think $2,150 total cost to the insurance. Is the split of 5,000 and 5,150, or would it need to be a 6,150, 4,000? Council, and if Councilor Nelson knows the answer, I'd be great with that. I just want to make sure the split's appropriate. Thanks.
With that, I'll go to Counselor Nelson. If he has any input.
Yeah, the split was in discussions with the Disc Golf Association, so it was what was appropriate for their split. So, and the 5,000 capital is, I believe, what we had originally approved. So, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Nelson. Counselor Magoon, are you good with that?
Yeah, just in short, then, Your Worship, I'm very much in favor of the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Magoon. With that, Counselor Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask administration, we had budgeted $8,000. Do we need to identify where the extra money is coming from?
Thank you, Counselor Wall. C.A. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels, and thank you, Councillor Watt, for the question. This was a question that I was going to bring up just for clarification. $8,000 was budgeted for, and in the community services area, the budgets are kind of down to the dollar in most areas, especially with the impacts of COVID on some of the revenue generating services that we provide. There is an option that other services could be reduced to make up this money, but we would look to council to see, I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but on very tight budgets and very tight budget year, we need to figure out where we should be funding it from.
Thank you, C.A. Olson. Counselor Wah.
Oh, that's, I'll go back in the queue for another question or two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Wah. Council. Any other, Counselor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I appreciate Councilor Wah's question, and until that's answered, I can't support the amendment. If we can come up with where the money's going to come from, and I know it's not going to impact something else that's council's deemed a priority item, then I'd be able to support it, but until then I can't. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Stashik. Counselor Wah.
I had another question. When the original agreement was developed for $8,000, was there any insurance costs that were factored into that amount?
C. Olson.
I will defer to Mr. Von Claveren or Ms. Howard, whoever's more appropriate to answer that.
Thank you, CEO Olson, and through the council. So yes, there was an amount of 700 preliminary taken into that account in that calculation of $8,000.
Thank you, Mr. Van Claveren. Counselor Wah, any?
Yeah, and the reason I asked that was I can understand Mr. Van Vasbotten's point about the fact that the 8,000 was derived at with X amount of insurance money being factored in. So I guess I wanted to ask as a follow-up, what is the total estimated insurance cost now?
Administration?
Yeah, through to Councillor Wall and to council. So basically that amount is $2,245 as stated in the quote that we received from Disc Golf recently.
Thank you. And I guess so that difference is about 1,500. So I could accept increasing the amount up to that increase in the insurance, but I wouldn't go the full 2,150 that's reflected in Councillor Nelson's motion, because I do want to honor the spirit of how we derived the agreement and maybe have the new totals reflect that. But I wouldn't want to go over and above it and cover the entire cost of insurance, because 700 was factored into the 8,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. I have a question for administration. I just going through the agreement. Their first year runs from the date that the agreement is issued, and I guess my question is, it doesn't follow a calendar year. It'll follow the first year agreement first on the date signed, and then the 12 months prior will be the first full year, and that's how the funds will be allocated. I guess that's my question to administration.
Yeah, through to Mr. Mayor, to council. Yes, that's correct. It goes by a full 12 months. We were expecting, of course, to sign this agreement close to the January 1st mark, but it is for 12 months.
So if I may, well, in following up, my question is, their insurance is going to be starting in the month of May, I would presume, if passed. So their cost wouldn't be the full 2,200, and we've allocated 8,000 in funds in 2021, yet their bill for 2021 will be below that, I would assume. So if you see where I'm kind of going with this, in 2022, we're fine. They get their entire cost and they'll pay for the entire 12 months. So has administration considered any of these costs that are delayed and that are kind of prorated for this year?
Thanks, and through the council again. No, we have not considered prorating, because basically, if the agreement is signed for the full year, we anticipate, of course, that the full year the payment for the insurance will run together with that. So when we are talking about signing the agreement, we anticipate 12 months and the 12 months insurance to be lined up with that as well.
Thank you. I'll follow up one last time. For the sake of moving this potentially forward, I do support the original motion. If this is going to be the crossroads to separate council, I'd be fine to allocate the second and third year to the funds of 10,100. I don't have the number, sorry, in front of me. But for this year, it remains at 8,000, because unless I'm really missing something, their insurance, they have not submitted or started to pay for insurance yet. So that price is quick math, should be around $1,400. So there's 700 in change in savings. So I don't want to convolute this, but we haven't taken into account prorating this for this year, although we allocated 8,000. So we're not off by that as much as it indicates. So I'll let that sit for now and see if we can find a solution. But if there's no alternative, I do support and premise this motion put forward in front of us. Council. Any further questions? Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Before it's called to question, I believe administration has asked for some guidance from council on where the funding should come from. And as I said earlier, until I know where that's coming from, and I know that it's not going to be significantly disruptive to anything else council's prioritized, I won't support the motion as it's put forward. So before it's called to question, I would look to council, potentially look to administration for some suggestions and some direction on where that funding could come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. With that, Is there any other clarification from administration on options that could help this conversation to find out where these funds are going to come from? And if not, is this something that we can deal with after? I'd like for this to flow as smoothly as possible. CA Olson, any comments regarding that?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So just in kind of connecting with staff in the background here, it really, without reducing a service level or reducing something else, there's no room to absorb that amount in the current budget. So there has to be something identified to give there. The other option, and that's just for the first year, so for the 2021 year. In future years, we can address that impact of the decision through budget to account for that increase. The other, I guess, quick solution would be to utilize that most money in the way that we have utilized it before. It's a small amount. It is able to be achieved through the use of that money. That isn't something that we put forward as an option for everything, I guess. If we do, that is something that council has identified for a couple of different things in the past, including the business support program and the offsetting the rec center user fees. There would be enough room in that amount to achieve this for this year and for us to address it during budget for subsequent years. Otherwise, if council has any suggestions, we're on the spot not able to identify exactly what service area we would put forward to make up that amount. As I stated before, it's a tight budget year and we're kind of down to the dollar. So I hope that provides a little bit of support or clarification to council in making this decision.
Thank you, CA Olson. With that, I have Councillor Magoon, Councillor Hawes, and Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, for myself, there's a couple of possibilities. We could look at the most money. We could ask administration to delve into, what the current situation of the Parks and Rec Reserve is. We could look at trying to claw back a couple $1,000s from the, capital side of things that goes towards the recreation construction budget. There's lots of different ways. This is where I guess I'll respectfully disagree. Often we talk about how important it is to make measured decisions. $2,000 approximately, the increase, it's doable. I think the real question is, where is it coming from? Absolutely, that's a question that needs to be answered, but I don't think it's a question that can be thoroughly and completely answered tonight in a way that's well thought out. I think we can make the decision that this is something we can do and ask administration to bring us back options, whether it's a reduction of service levels or grabbing funding from other potential areas. But I hesitate at council just sitting around the table tonight, randomly picking reserves of where to take money from or increasing taxation. You know what I mean? Without a full understanding of what those consequences might be. Again, $2,000, we've all worked with budget before. It's doable. The question is, where is it going to come from, the final answer? So I guess, I would look at supporting it and then asking administration to bring back a report where we do make a more thorough and thoughtful decision on where that money needs to come from. Again, with a full understanding of the consequences and options. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I realize we're having a big conversation over a small amount of money, but I appreciate administration speaking to the budget. And we all know, and many organizations, as we know, our budgets are very important and tight this year. I guess for me, until I know where it's going to come from, and most might be the most, I guess, the best option this evening to make a decision, knowing it's going to come from that potentially. I don't agree on a report at this time, making this decision at this point. I would be more inclined to hear that report first before passing or being in favor of this vote. I do, though, want to speak to the fact that, operations and reserve is the way I understand it. I realize that, the reserves are going to get less this year for the disc golf society, to compensate for it. And, and I think that putting more into the operations is a reasonable option for this year. And then to look at it again next year for how to move forward with the 2022 budget. But until I'm of the mind of Councillor Stashik, I realize it's not a lot of money, but it is something that we should know where it's coming from before we make a decision. So as it is, I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes and Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I struggle with this a little bit too, in that I'd rather put it in administration's hands, but we have a $20,000 council contingency budget that could certainly be used. I share Mayor Michael's sentiment that we're likely only going to be on the hook for the actual 2021 year for 66% or thereabouts of that total dollar amount of the increase. So to me, if we are in support of the increase, if somebody wanted to make an amendment to that is funded through council contingency, that has no cascading impacts on anything else in the organization, and it's a fund that we've rarely used, if not at all. And that to me lets us move along with this conversation, get it approved, and kind of allow everybody to do their work without admin going back and preparing a big report for it might be $1,200 or $1,300 for this year. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't want to propose an amendment yet. I do want to see what the support is around the table so that we're not making useless amendments. But I would support that. I would support the council contingency if it got fellow councillors on board and got this passed right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I appreciate the suggestion that it come from the council contingency fund. That's something I can definitely support. If there'd been an amendment that it was to be funded through most, I would not have supported that. That most funding, the use of the most money has been something that's been on council's radar and that we've been waiting to come forward to us for quite some time. And there's been, knowing that the money's there's been suggestions over time to keep going to that and whittling away at it. And I don't think that's fair considering we haven't had the conversation that so many others in our community are waiting for to see if that can be used to help them with the troubles that they're having too. So with that said, I would like to propose an amendment. Whenever Ms. Anderson's ready. Yeah. With the additional funding to be provided from the council contingency fund. And if I could speak to it quickly, Mayor Michaels.
Absolutely.
I will support the original motion provided that the extra funding is coming from council contingency. I do think that Mayor Michaels made a very good point about the first year insurance charge only being a partial year, but I'm okay with that. It gives the Disc Golf Society a bit of an opportunity to maybe take on an additional initiative that they may not have. I realize it's pretty minor, but I'm okay with them having a little bit of a leg up over what they were hoping to have in the first year that helps set them up for future success. So with that amendment, I'll support the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. I'll go to CAO Olson.
Mayor Michaels, just a point of clarification. The use of council contingency to support that extra dollar amount, that's for 2021's agreement year only. Okay, just to specify.
Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, that was the intent. I appreciate that clarification. So if administration wants to add for the 2021 calendar year to my amendment, that's perfectly fine. If that brings more clarity for administration.
Perfect. Thank you for that, CEO Olson and Councillor Stashik. With that, I have Councillor Wild and Councillor Race. And Councillor Hawes.
The additional wording regarding 2021 was what I was going to bring up, so nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. I am just want to say I'm very appreciative of Councillor Nelson bringing this forward using council contingency funding. I think my heart tightened a little bit when the word or the statement, using a service level, drawing money from a service level, which is not something I'd like to see. I will be supporting this amended motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I too will support this. I think the contingency fund is the appropriate place to take this from. It's something that comes up. We didn't plan for this, and it's the appropriate place to take it from. If council, this is for council that wants to move forward. The most money is there for other things. It was an option, but I prefer taking it from contingency. So with this amendment, then I'll be in approval of the previous motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. Any further questions before I call that part of the question? Seeing none, I'll call to question the amendment with additional funding for 2021 to be provided from the Council Contingency Fund. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Now we are back to the main motion that's been amended. And I'll give Ms. Anderson a moment to put those together. And council, any further questions or comments? And if I could just ask Ms. Anderson to bring that up. Councillor Nelson and Councillor Stashik, any issues with the combination there before I call to question? Seeing none, I'll call to question that the Hinton Disc Golf Operating Agreement be amended to reflect the town contribution of $10,150 with $5,000 utilized for capital and $5,150 for operations, with additional funding for 2021 to be provided from the Council Contingency Fund. Council, all those in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you, administration and all of council, for getting to that point. Council, anything further for this item today? Seeing none, thank you, everyone. And we'll move to our third item for this evening, Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation. CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This item is before council in response to two outstanding directions regarding the Maxwell Lake Bridge, including a direction from 2019 to halt work and bring a report with options and high-level costs to council, as well as more recent direction during budget 2021 that this capital item come to council for decision. Administration has received approval of the use of ISIP funds in the amount of $251,000 to fund some of the outstanding work on the bridge ramps. Included in the report are three options for completion of the bridge project, as well as information on the pursuit of a design build process to support a faster timeline, potentially save some money on the overall project costs, and to encourage innovation in the project as well. I do have Mr. Russo on in the meeting tonight, and I will ask him at this time to take a moment and explain what contributed to the estimates included in the report, and to provide some introduction to what was provided to council tonight. Mr. Russo.
Mr. Russo.
Thank you, CA Olson, and good evening, council through the chair. Based on the understanding of the unfinished work that was on the bridge, I believe that a grant was applied for, and we just recently got the approval for the grant literally 2 or 3 days ago. The way we approached this as administration was to focus on completing the unfinished works, as CA Olson just mentioned. You would also remember, or maybe recall, that the former bridge, that parts of it is still fixed to the ground right now, which due to weather delays back in 2019, I believe, was not removed. So that is part of the scope of the works that we've considered. To help council further make an informed decision, I will emphasize these are options. These are not our direction to you. You have many options, as you've heard earlier this evening, but just to focus on the three options that we provided. So option one is basically taking into consideration that if the existing bridge remains intact, that as far as I understand, that the existing bridge has been designed to take vehicular loading, meaning something to the value of a pickup truck in excess of 10,000 pounds. So with that in mind and that rationale, we looked at option one to create the access ramps to remove the existing steps, and then also to connect the existing ramps that is on the south end, I believe, of the bridge, and to make it functional so that it could be a ramp that complies with the right gradients as well as with the Alberta wetlands requirements. Furthermore, option one also requires or included that we have the safety component for emergency personnel's response time to be accommodated, meaning that they'd be able to access the bridge via motorized vehicles. And of course, that includes the loading on the ramps, meaning that you would have your piles spaced a bit closer. You would have more reinforced beams from a timber perspective, as well as the planking. So that took your cost at least 1.5 times more compared to the option one cost of 265,000. So option one is driven by safety concerns for emergency personnel response. Of course, with that, it would have a wider footprint for the ramps accessing the existing bridge. So basically, it would have the same width as what the existing bridge has. That cost, as I said, it's 1.5 times the 265,000. That brings it to 398,000. Now, having said that, that is outside the scope of what our budget is. Even if you take the granted portion of 251,000 plus the town supported component, you're over and above what the allowance of the budget is that council has approved in December of 2020. Moving on to option two, as I touched on, it does not include for any vehicular access, such as for emergency response. What will have to happen with emergency response, they will have to do it manually, access it by foot, take the gear over, and then of course respond accordingly. That being said, having spoken to the deputy fire chief, that if that is the case, if that's the option we may consider, then they will have to change their operations in terms to accommodate the response time to be of an adequate nature. The 265,000 for option two is based on no vehicle traffic, limited amount of maintenance vehicle access, and basically focusing on foot traffic only. And how we arrived at that number was based on the consulting engineers that we were working closely with, the 2 RFPs received of a recent project completed in the Edmonton region, where the cost was in the order of $2,400 per square meter. Now, the $2,400 per square meter is not just the material cost and to build it and to put the screw piles in the ground. It also contains costs for insurance, mobilization, demobilization. So that cost is an all-encompassing cost, hence it's likely on the high side. We've also taken into consideration the cost of timber when lumber where it's at right now. So we made a bit of an escalation calculation in that. To focus back, the initial safety and efficiency concern, that is not incorporated in this. Now, if the safe working operation, the response time is readjusted according to the deputy fire chief, then this can be accommodated. That means the existing bridge stays intact. And as I shared with council very late yesterday, there is a rendering that was prepared by the consultant that shows the expanse, why the 264,000 to be exact. They also have a bit of a decking area that makes it a bit of an area where we could maybe use it as a learning facility. It accommodates the existing ramp that has to connect to that side where the steps is currently at. So it kind of aesthetically gives you a beautiful finish. If you would remember with the recent site visit we had, that the existing power cap, as we put with the bridge is resting on, is slightly exposed to where the current ramp is, because the steps, they make the difference in elevation. We try to conceal that to have a somewhat aesthetic appeal to it, hence the decking approach. Now, the decking approach is about 33 square meters greater than if you just had to link the two ramps to either side of the abutment. So if we don't elect to go with a decking system, just simply ramp connections, then that would reduce the total square meters from 110 down to about 83 square meters. And then you can times that and you will get the actual cost of what your opinion of cost is right now. Moving on to option 3, that is removing the existing bridge completely and its necessary abutments dependent on what AEP, Alberta Environment and Parks, dictate to us at the time to bring the wetlands back to its former state. Again, this is an estimate. I do feel that the estimate is probably on the high side. However, it is going to require, winter work, removal of the bridge, dismantling the bridge into its segments, how it was initially assembled, and then taking it either to a storage site or an alternate site where we have to install it. The grant component will not cover the cost of removing the bridge and reinstalling it elsewhere. So that will have to be a different criteria should we elect to go this way as to how the grant may be treated, or we may stand to lose the grant, so to speak. So, and then just finally, I just want to hold on to give council all the opportunity to ask the questions. We did include, since this is opinion of probable cost based on former projects of last year, we could go with one of two options. You have a traditional bid build approach, which is a very linear approach where you get a design completed, you get the documentation ready, you go out to bid, you get a price, and you award it to a contractor. That's the conventional approach. You could go with a little bit more of a condensed contracted approach where you can do design build, meaning that you could have the engineering, the contracting element all in one, and you can get value for money out of that in terms of better ideas and better concepts coming out of it. And that will give you a more defined cost of what this project could potentially cost you. Finally, I'll just conclude to say that you'll have options, not necessarily these 3 options that we've provided, but it's enough to create a conversation. And whatever you want to ask questions in terms of existing bridge, we'll try and answer that for you. I will look forward to getting some form of understanding where you would like to go with this project. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, CEO Olson and Mr. Russo for that. With that, Council, I have Councillor Race and Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question to administration, hypothetically, let's say the bridge is built to accommodate an ambulance. When the ambulance goes to the other side, is it there just at a staging area? Because there's not a lot of room on the other side. So does it go there and have the patient transported to the ambulance?
Administration.
Mayor Michaels, so I don't believe the intention there was to have an ambulance enter into the trail system, but to have quicker access for a 6x6. And there's a piece of equipment called a bumblebee that they also use for response to the types of things that you'd see in the trail system behind. But that is my understanding. Acting Fire Chief Hall is also on the line. If there's any clarification there, I would invite him to provide that now. That is my understanding.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Race?
I know there is probably, everybody has a question. I have another question if no one else is in queue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so how far into the trail system can our maintenance people go, and on what vehicle will they be going?
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Ms. Howarth is, if you're still on the line, I would defer to you. Thank you.
Thanks. So Right now, we do sort of start to trip over some of the boardwalk sections of the trail systems. So we can get quite a ways in there in the loops and around both southeast and a bit west until we hit the other the main bridge by the Beaver Lodge. So it does give us a bit quite a bit more access to that part of our trail system for maintenance, and the other areas we can access a bit from the other end of the trail system. So it does open up a lot of options for us.
Okay, so Mr. Mayor, I just need clarity on just one little thing, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, we're building this big bridge for $398,000 more. Should somebody be injured on the other side, they're going to use this vehicle to get to that person in the bush, or is that person going to be transported to a central location in the bush? I just don't know how this works.
I'll see but before that, my understanding is she has said the bumblebees, there's different ways to transport people. So depending on the situation, it would be a multitude of ways and depending on the injury. But with that, I'll hand it over to C.A. Olson if there's any additional clarity.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I just connecting with Acting Chief Hall to see if there's anything further that he could provide. My understanding was that the 6x6 access over the bridge would be, I guess, quicker to access certain points of the trail system. And the bumblebee is something that can also be used. I'm not exactly sure what that entails. Mr. Hall, do you have some clarification that you could provide?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Michelson, to council. The understanding of access for the system itself would be just a quicker access to certain locations within the actual trail system from a stage location. So, it just allows a quicker response. It all depends on where within the trail system, the potential response would be, how far in we would actually be able to access with a 6x6 unit. But it definitely would decrease our walk-in time or trying to sometimes decipher where we have to go. We don't always get greatest directions for those type of incidents. So it just allows a quicker response to the backside of the Maxwell Lakes trails so that we can try to get access closer and better for patient care and outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate the fact that I submitted the question about how the figures were received, or pardon me, how they were developed and presented on the part of administration regarding the three potential options. I do have to admit, and I'll still express that to myself, the numbers associated with the options, they're too high. I mean, in short, in the citizens I spoke with, since we've received our agenda packages with the potential options, there's just, it's unpalatable at best. Really, we're talking about option one, where we continue as the original plan was to the tune of $400,000. Option two, pedestrian access only $265,000 estimated. And I understand that's a project cost. It's a scope. It's not the cost of the ramps. It includes a lot of other things. But still, it's just, to me, that it just does not strike a chord with something that's reasonable for a community at this stage of the game, even with the fact that we do have grant funding available. I think one of the problems is looking at the history of this project, going back to the last council. The last council of Hinton was presented a budget, passed a budget that allowed for the funding of the bridge. Where I see the failure is that there was not on the part of administration and then later by council, because council didn't get to see the design until it was really in, was the bridge. And it's made a lot of the citizens in our community unhappy. Aesthetically, physically, it doesn't fit in with the landscape. Then, of course, we got into the quagmire, forgive the pun, of dealing with the wetland issues and how that interfaced with approaches up to the bridge. So I think this is actually, in a lot of ways, council's opportunity, this council's opportunity to make some meaningful decisions. And I think we have seen time and time again, and we've heard from the community that they feel like there's been a lack of engagement on their part. I think this is the time to course correct. We have a moment to take a breath, to look at the bridge. We've had some really good input since this agenda package has been released from members of our community that I have to admit, I don't disagree with. You know, in spending some time out at Maxwell Lake again, you know, just as late as last night, you know, the I-beams that support the ends of the bridge, they're ugly, right? They don't fit with the natural surrounding element of what's in that wetland. You know, the notion to lower the bridge as a bit of a compromise suggested by some citizens. Again, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think really what it comes down to is dollars and cents. Who's going to pay for it? How much is going to come from potential grant funding? And what are we going to do to make that, you know, that area something that looks good and feels good for all of us? I think we need to explore that. I think it's up to council to demonstrate the political will to involve our community members, to explore some solutions involving that bridge based on the input we've received. And if that means taking a little bit more time to coordinate administration, hearing exactly what those thoughts and ideas are, I think we need to do that. I think we need to explore that because that way what we're going to give the community is something they actually want and not a bridge that was just plopped there and people have to deal with because there's a difference. So I'm willing to hear what the rest of council thinks, but ultimately I'd like to see some more collaboration with members in our community before we decide what to do with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I do have a question for administration. It's regarding the ISIP grant. And if any of that ISIP grant money is transferable to any other work that could be done at Maxwell Lake or on the Beaver Boardwalk. And I'll leave it at that for now.
C. Olson.
Mr. Rousseau.
Thank you, C.A. Olson, through to the Chair Council. I believe that as long as the funds are dedicated and intended to be used for the Maxwell Lake Bridge, and that the scope doesn't materially changes too extreme, that we could be able to work with a grantor on that. Maybe it's a slight alteration to the application, a request to do that. Once we know exactly where council and the community feels comfortable with the bridge or what's going to happen, then we can take that back to the grantor to ensure that they are in favor of our changes and our additions.
Follow up, Mayor Michaels. So if, for example, there was a suggestion to go beyond the 110 square meters of ramp on the north and south side and to extend that as walkway access that went all the way back to tie into the existing Beaver Boardwalk walkway, both to the north and south, overtopping all of the current gravel pathway. Could that likely be something that would be associated with the Maxwell Lake Bridge and Ramp project?
Administration.
Good.
Good evening. To answer Councillor's Ostashik's question, the grant is pretty much the category for the grant is for trails, bridges, and anything to do with outdoor activity per se, transportation wise. So yes, it could happen. The only difficulty with that is that the grant is already approved, and as Mr. Vincent alluded to, sorry, we would definitely have to go back to the grant body and find out if we would have to go back in the queue, and what is our chances if we say we're going to do something else, we might end up losing the grant. The other part of that, the timeline in which we have to spend the money. We have to start spending this money by September, and we have to finish the project by December. So going back and trying to redo the application. It's just time sensitive.
Councillor Stashik, any follow-up on the response?
No, it's good for now, but you could put me back in the queue, please, Mayor Michaels.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Stashik, in administration. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't know if this is a question that administration is prepared to answer this evening. I guess it's just, there's been some talk and suggestion by the community potentially of lowering the bridge as a part of the option, to leave the bridge, where it's at, but aesthetically lowering it. Not an engineer. Has that ever been looked into by administration, even as a possibility to lower that bridge and potentially alter to the bridge, suggesting, either removing or cutting off or down the side rails? Is that even a feasible option at this time that administration is aware of?
Asia Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This is, it is a feasible option. However, there is, like anything, a cost associated with it. So I know that in preparation for tonight, Mr. Rousseau and Ms. Beckford did look into that. And I don't know, Mr. Rousseau, if there's something that you'd like to add for context.
Thank you, Sia Olson, through to the chair, to council. The short answer is yes, you can lower the bridge. However, you have to consider that the bridge has been designed from an engineering perspective, that the power cap is at the height it is, the bridge is at the height to ensure that you have, as we call it, a freeboard difference between the extreme water level at any given time to the underside of the bridge. If we lower that, we reduce the freeboard requirements based on what the design entails. Having just spoken to the engineers myself this afternoon, they can then reconfigure the power cap potentially to lower the bridge by about 150 to 250 millimeters. The lowering of the balustrades, or the rails as we would call it, that is quite doable. That to me is not an impact to the bridge. The only difference is you're going to have potential for, if it's too low, kids could be impacted through that. But to me, that's just cosmetic right now, and it will lighten the bridge up as well. So that may even help us as we have to reconfigure the foundations.
So if I might, thank you for that. I realize everything comes with a cost. Was there a ballpark figure that if we were to do that or decide upon that route, what the price tag would be to lower the bridge potentially? Because part of my thing too is if we lower it, might it also, because when I'm over there, it seems like at that height needs to be a fairly, either lengthy or steep also ramp. By lowering it, potentially, would that cut down some of the costs, to then making the rest of the area around it accommodate? So was there a price tag, I guess, potentially on the lowering of it? And would that alter the price tag ultimately to of the ramp's accessibility?
I'll go back to Mr. Russo.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to council. The short answer is yes, we did get a price. Again, Councillor House, this is an estimated cost just based on a conversation. You're looking at about $75,000 to $80,000 to cut down the power cap, to re-engineer the reinforcement, put back the power cap, and of course you have to lift the bridge to do that. So that's where the 75 or the 80,000 come from. You will have to talk to AEP as well, just to make sure that we are within the confines of how construction methodologies occur. But the short answer is yes, it can be done. Two, there's a cost of approximately 80,000 to undertake the reconfiguration we're talking about.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Russo.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes and Mr. Russo. With that, I have Councillor Magoon and Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And actually, I think the point Mr. Russo made, at least from what I heard, I need to reconfirm because it might actually inform a motion. So Mr. Russo, if I could inquire again, the cost of lowering that bridge estimated by the engineers was approximately $75,000?
Mr. Russo?
Through the chair to Councillor McGowan. That's correct. 75 to 80,000 to lower the bridge. And just to Councillor Haas's question, I didn't answer that it won't reduce the footprint of the boardwalk or the access ramps. What it will do, it will facilitate better grading, as you alluded to, especially with the existing ramp that's a little bit in bad shape. So we'll be able to make it more accessible for wheelchair ramps. It's not that steep. So that would be an added advantage.
Councillor Magoon?
Mr. Mayor, if I could speak to that point, then I mean, in a moment, I'm going to start trying to craft away and hopefully beat the band. But again, I think that's the right direction then. And it certainly wasn't something I thought of when we first had this brought back to council. But I think this notion of lowering the bridge, reducing its overall visual impact, and also making it a much more pedestrian friendly gradient leading up to the bridge is likely the best way to start exploring, because I think that meets with the concerns that we've heard from the community. You know, is it going to meet all the concerns? No, because there's certainly a few. We've heard a very vocal few in our community who'd like to see the bridge fully removed. But we've also seen members of that same group say to us, you know, if we could reduce the overall impact of that bridge, it would be better than it is right now. And it would certainly be much more visually appealing to that, you know, that overall aesthetic and vision. I think this is the chance for council to make a mark on this project in a positive way. So I'm going to start jotting some things down, wait for my colleagues to see what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. I have Councillor Stashik, then Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So I'm going to preface my comment by saying that me personally, option one for me is off the table. I think we've heard from enough of the community who've indicated that though emergency access, it would be a beneficial thing, it still doesn't grant full access to all the trails that are on the backside of Maxwell Lake. Granted, it does give access to a portion, but not all of them. And the citizens that I've talked to and heard from feel that the trade-off for that additional access isn't worth the impact that the current bridge has placed on the natural aesthetic of it. So for me, option one's off the table. So if that opens the door to changing the structure of the bridge to make it more user-friendly, to potentially lower, I'm going to roll back a little bit here. I understand too that part of the reason the bridge is built the way that it is, and it's the height that it is from an engineering perspective, that it's similar to a truss bridge, and it needs that deck up structure to be able to carry the 10,000 pound limit that it's engineered and designed for. However, if we're going to move away from option one and take that off the table, I think that it's feasible and reasonable to be able to drop those handrails down, potentially take away some of the cross pieces that are in the existing railing to allow access for children to be able to see through the railings. Part of the appeal of the old bridge that was there was you could look over the railing or look through the railings and watch the beavers and the fish and everything else that's part of the wetland there swim underneath the bridge. In its current state, you can't do that. With that said, option one off the table. So I do see an opportunity here to, as Councillor Magoon asked, lower the bridge to make it less visually intrusive, possibly lower some of the hand railings if we're not going to be sticking to a 10,000 pound engineering limit, remove some of the cross structure on the bridge so to allow better sight lines for children and smaller people. And the other thing, now that said, the other thing that I'm having a hard time getting my head around, and I say this with all due respect to administration, I understand they put a lot of legwork into this and a lot of understanding, and they know what the potential design might look like. To me, I haven't seen that yet. I don't know how extravagant it is. I don't know what it looks like, but I will be completely frank, I'm having a hard time getting my head around that we budgeted $300,000 for Beaver Boardwalk replacement, which includes a full removal, reinstallation, screw piles, new decking, everything like that. That's approximately 450 square meters plus. with a budget of $300,000, to the best of my knowledge, was achievable. So now we've got, what I'm hearing is 110 square meters with a budget of $265,000. And because I can't get my head around that, I can't support moving ahead even with option 2 in its current presentation. So if something comes along, moving forward, where there's some discussion about potentially a different budget applied to one of these solutions that council can vote on, and then if it goes out for tender and the tenders come back higher than what council had approved, then there can be a discussion about why. Because clearly, if that's the case, there's something there that I'm missing, that I'm not understanding, and I don't necessarily need to know about it right now. But if the numbers do come in higher than what's approved, then I could be educated and told why it needs to be that way. And at that point, council can make a decision about whether they're willing to invest those additional dollars into moving the project forward. To sum up everything, though, whatever comes out of this discussion tonight, whether it includes modifications to the bridge or it's just the ramps or whatever, I will likely not support anything that goes above the approved ISIP funding. And that's going to be my max ceiling for now. And I might even consider something that's even lower based on the potential that we could use that additional leftover ISIP money to be able to do something additional. So that's my long-winded comment on it. And I look forward to hearing what the rest of council has to say and some direction moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. I have everyone in the queue, and I will start with Councillor Rayston Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to visualize what a lowered bridge would look like. And I think Mr. Russo talked millimeters, centimeters. Are we talking lower at a foot, a foot and a half? That's where I'm missing hope.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So just to maybe by virtue of illustration, Councillor Race, if you take a straight rule, one like this, that's about this height, that's about the amount of drop we're talking about. So if you take a standard ruler, that's about the drop, the maximum we're talking about.
Would that be around 6 inches, maybe?
Yeah, it's just over 6 inches, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
I'd like to make a motion that the Maxwell Lake Bridge ramps be constructed to allow pedestrian access only, with a budget of $125,000, and that the project scope, details, timeline, and deliverables come to council no later than September 30th, 2021. Thanks, Ms. Anderson. If I could speak to it, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of citizens, both those that are very passionately engaged with the boardwalk and just average people on the street. I'm fortunate to have a public-facing job that I can just randomly poll a lot of people, and the overall majority want to keep that bridge, want to keep access there. So they want to be able to cross the lake there and have bike access, pedestrian access to cross that. So working backwards from there, if the community wants there still to be a crossing there, then to me, I have no interest in removing the bridge. If we're removing the bridge, it's because there's going to be nothing there at all, and return it to the wetland. And I don't believe that's what the community wants. I think decreasing this budget potentially accomplishes a few things. Number one, I share the same thoughts and concerns as my fellow councillors in the overall cost and the sticker shock of it, but it might require some creativity. It might require donations. It might require to mobilize volunteers to take on part of this project and involve the community. You know, I look at a big chunk of the cost being mobilization, demobilization, and just operational costs. We have a winning bidder that's already working on the boardwalk already that will already be mobilized. And, you know, they may be able to bid on a project like this without having to bring on nearly as much mobilization costs or insurance costs because they already have it. So to me, I think there's a way to make this happen with the dollar amount that is feasible. And I also think the really important thing, and I wasn't trying to kind of sidetrack the conversation, but this motion would still have budget within it. If a future motion or further motion tonight to lower the bridge or make other changes, there's still budget room to do that. So it wouldn't preclude council from making that decision later on in this meeting as well. So thanks to everybody that's reached out to council, and you know, I've been having these conversations for the better part of a year, both informally and hosting things. And you know, this is really what I'm most comfortable with, and I think serves the broad community as well as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. With that, I have Councillor Waugh, Councillor Magoon, then Councillor Hawes.
I guess I can only speak to the motion on the floor at this point. So we'll see where that goes, and then I have some questions. But at this point, I'm not in a position to support anything. I think there's still a lot of information and details we don't have. I'm really not interested in moving anything forward until I have more chance to get some more details out of admin and maybe try and hone a little bit more from other councillors what their concerns are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. If you could also keep me in the main queue, I will speak to this as well. Yeah, at this point, I'm very much in the same sort of train of thought as Councillor Waugh. I certainly think pedestrian-only access is going to be part of the final version of this project. But again, I think there's an opportunity here to take the feedback we've received over the past several days and also give the community an opportunity to sort of have the last word in this and make this project their own. So I don't believe I can support that, the motion on the floor at this stage, simply because I think there's another half to this planning that still needs to be done before we make the final decision on this, something that the whole community can stand behind. I agree with part of it in principle, just not right now, given the information I've received. And I do just want to note that I did express to Councillor Nelson, I probably would support this, but again, it's the information I've received since yesterday that's giving me pause to think that we can wrap up the planning side of this before fulfilling the construction of the pedestrian only steps and access. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll speak to this if I could stay in the main queue as well. I just have a question on another part of it. I do appreciate this motion. I think, you know what, financially, it does, you know, get to see at least what out there in the community, what kind of bids we might get, how it'll look. You know, I'm the same mind of Councillor Nelson. The conversations I've had is they do want access. People want access to go across there. I think ultimately, I think we do need to look at how we then going to access it. Right now, it's not a good setup. I was just standing out there the other day, or just last night, watching a baby carriage come up to it and then turn around and go the other, you know, back where they came from. They can't cross it. We need to move forward with this. We need to, you know, get, you know, access to that bridge. You know, so I think, you know, it's a reasonable amount of money. As Councillor Nelson said, we do have work being done out there with contractors, so that might, you know, sweeten the pot, you know, to get, you know, those bids in there for that. I appreciate the fact too, though, is that we can still discuss the bridge itself, the aesthetics of it, all those things. This doesn't stop us from making that. This is specifically to the ramps to the bridge. I think, you know, and I think we've got a lot of feedback, from our community members that, that this is a direction to go, if there's no flavor of moving the bridge at all. So, I'd like to hear from the rest of council on this, but I could support this one for sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Astashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michael. Speaking just to the motion that's before us, I'm comfortable making a decision to be able to move forward with something today. I think council has had all kinds of opportunity to collect feedback regarding the Maxwell Lake Bridge. We've been hearing from citizens about this bridge for nearly 2 years now, year and a half. So I think council has a pretty good handle on what the community is looking for from both sides of the discussion. I've had lots of people tell me that the bridge is there now. It might not be, what they would have chosen if they had had free reign over what they were going to pick to put there. But since it's there now, in the interest of making sure that we're striking a balance between respectful use of taxpayer dollars and access to the wetland and ensuring the natural aesthetic of it, that the bridge stay and that it be used in a responsible way, modified if necessary, to be able to have that access and not go through a huge additional financial expense to take it out, move it somewhere else, build a new superstructure, put it in place, and then put a different bridge in where that one is existing. I think we have an opportunity here to have a full open discussion tonight about what council can do to make the best of the situation that we're here, make decisions, and move it forward in accordance with what we've heard over the last year and a half from the citizens of Hinton. Continuing to kick it down the road to collect more information, I'm not sure what the benefit of that is. We've been hearing from pretty much everybody who wants to speak to it already. So in terms of this one though, this particular motion, I do have a specific question for administration. And that's that the ISIP grant that we've received is for $251,000, I believe. So that said, with this motion limiting the cost to $125,000, if there's no other further direction moving forward about what could be done with the other $126,000, what would happen to that $126,000? Thank you.
Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. There's a couple of options without knowing where this is heading and whether additional direction would come from council. We would proceed with under that direction of utilizing 125,000 and kind of see where things wrap up. That said, what we could do in the meantime, we don't have the answers on whether this is transferable and how easy that is. That would be information that we'd be seeking from the grantors. Just to provide a little bit of context on how we got here, this was a 6-month process to get approval for the 251. It first had a provincial threshold, and then through the province, they made recommendations to the federal government for us to receive this money. So it was just last week that we received full approval for the 251. We can go back and find out what's possible if we weren't to utilize all the grant money, what we could use it for, or whether this was the end of the road and any funds that we do not use on this specific project would have to be returned to the grantor. So there's a bit of information that we need to look into and provide back to council. Hopefully that answers your question. If there's anything further, we're happy to receive more questions.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Astashik, any follow-up? You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, if I could follow up quickly. With that said, if this was called to question right now, I wouldn't be able to support it because although, the argument's made by, and I've heard it by citizens, that grant funds are taxpayer dollars. That said, if we don't make use of it, somebody else is going to. So we might as well take the grant funds that we've been awarded and make good use of them. So limiting our ability to use them fully, I can't support, not right now. So if there was, some support to postpone this decision until later in the meeting when we hear something else, or there's some amendments made to it so that some other potential changes can be rolled into it, so that we're looking at a full picture and that we've got access to that whole 251,000 and it's available to make good, strong use of. That's something I could support. But at this time, limiting our administration's ability to move forward to essentially what half the grant value is, I don't think that's something I could support at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Before I go to the queue, if I can ask Ms. Anderson to put the motion back up quickly, and if possible, and I apologize if you cannot do this, would you be able to copy and paste it and put it into the chat box? Because it's such a different motion than what was in the package, it'd be nice to have for council to look back on and ask clarifying questions if possible. If not, this will help. And with that, I'll go to Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the reason I'm looking for caution in us moving forward is that I don't want to dive into something that we don't fully understand. Beyond that one artist rendition of what it might look like, we don't really know what things are going to look like. We don't really have any details, and that I'm reticent to have us go ahead without having the public having a much better idea of what this is going to look like, what it's going to entail, and I share some of Councillor Stashik's concerns earlier about much earlier what he said about some of the costs and how they flesh out. So I per square foot. So to me, that's why I'm hesitant for us to do anything too binding tonight. If we wanted to make some, if we wanted to try and move some things forward for us to consider next week in a final version, I could go with that. But I got to tell you, I'm a little hesitant with the information we have in front of us to do something that's going to bind us moving forward, and that's the reason for my caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. I have myself, I guess my question in understanding the motion, would requests for proposals be put out right away with this direction? Because for myself, I have no problem going to contractors and seeing how inexpensive can we do this. We're not binded to have to accept any. I'm also in favor of this coming back to council to approve it at whatever dollars. I'd be open to that. But is the intent of this motion for tender or for RFPs to go out immediately and then we get a report after the RFP is approved in September? I'm trying to understand the mechanism of how this will be sort of laid out. So my question, I guess, would be first to Councillor Nelson of his intent here, and then I would go back to administration for any clarifying comments regarding that. Councillor Nelson?
So to answer your question directly, I guess I look at this motion serving what council's role is, which is approving budgets and service levels and the mechanics of all of those things. I don't know that those are our role to get into. So I'm not sure how to answer that. And I also understand there's timeline challenges in order to get this work done this winter. We've seen what happens when reports are delayed. How many years have we gone without fixing the boardwalk and doing all those things because we just keep, waiting, a little bit more information, a little bit further, and all of a sudden it's October and we're now a whole year behind because we're so limited on when we can do construction. So I don't know exactly how to answer your conversation. I think that's what we trust administration to do is to carry out the task that council moves. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that. That's why I wanted to ask you first. And administration, so your interpretation of this motion, this would go out to an RFP between now and obviously before September 30th, and then the follow-up report on the bid, if approved at the cost of 125 or lower, would then have a report of the the timelines, the who got it, et cetera, et cetera. Is that how administration interprets this direction? CEO Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Ms. Anderson, could you put the motion back up on the screen? Yes. So the question, Mayor Michaels, is whether this would come back to council for approval prior to moving ahead with the project, or whether, sorry, I don't think I followed what your question was.
No, not if it's below cost, but for the public, and I want to make sure that we don't overlook anything. My understanding for this is administration would go out for a request for proposal, so design build to construct a pedestrian ramp for no more than $125,000. Then that request for proposal would be approved by administration on its own, and then after that is done by September 30th, we would have a report on all of that, sort of like what we just went through a bit with the 4 sections for the Beaver Boardwalk. I just want to clarify this, because if we're going to move forward today, I don't want anything to be misconstrued or for us not to be on the same page. So my question is, RFP would go out for design build, you guys would select someone, and then we would get an overall report after, before September 30th. Am I interpreting that correctly?
I think so, Mayor Michaels. That the one piece of clarification that could be provided within this motion is the details, timelines, and deliverables come to council in an RFD no later than September 30th. The way it's worded, it could come as an information item to council if council's looking to make a decision before or on some of those pieces that would come in the report. Including that it would come in an RFD would provide that clarity to council and administration.
Thank you, CEO Olson. So I'll go back to the queue and let that sit. That's why I posed this question. We have to decipher, is this going to come back to council as a decision? I'm okay with it not if it comes under 125,000. I just don't know if that clarity is in this motion right now. So with that, I'll go to Councillor Magoon.
Actually, I'm going to withdraw for right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, it was my other question, but Councillor Stashik brought it up to a certain extent in regards to the amount of money, and the IPS ICIP funds. So I have a question about those funds before potentially proposing an amendment or getting some feedback. So the lowering of the bridge potentially, would that fall in the criteria of those funds? I remember that Ms. Bedford mentioned that it's for trails, bridges, and outdoor activity transportation. So my question is, would the ICIP cover the lowering of it if that's the will of council?
Administration?
Mayor Michaels, I think that's a question that we would need to ask. It is outside of the scope of what we applied for. However, we could seek that clarification. It is more in line than removing the bridge, especially if there's an argument to be made about connectivity and that sort of thing. That's something I don't think we can definitively answer tonight, but information that we can provide to council.
If I may, thank you. Because if I may, the train of thought that I was having, and it was in regards, like I said, a follow up to Councillor Stashik's concern about the 125,000, another it being 251,000 in total. I'd prefer also not giving that money back. And if we could take, another budget of I've heard $75,000 to $80,000, give or take, amend it to also include $100,000 to lower the bridge. However, I'm hearing the answer for administration is a little hesitant now to propose that amendment, not knowing whether or not that funding could cover that. But that was my question in the main queue. So I can come out of the main queue, but I don't know what other councillors' thoughts are on that, but that was my train of thought. So thank you, administration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. I have Councillor Nelson and Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make one comment, and this motion doesn't change the overall funding of the project as a whole. I look at it similar. If we had $100 million to build a rec center and somebody made a motion that says, you know, a max funding of $30 million for a pool, it doesn't mean we lose the other 70. There's connection to the bridge, there's the bridge itself, there's the ramps, there's a connecting of the other boardwalk to the ramps. So this motion is just saying on the ramps themselves, we can only be spending 125,000. So if anything, that shouldn't automatically trigger that the entire project cost decreases by the amount for just the ramp. So I think it gives us a lot of room to explore other opportunities as well. The other comment I'll make too is if we're actually looking to bring reports back and make motions to have these reports come back, if they can come back in a timely fashion that allows us to still do this project over the winter, I'd be highly amenable to having it postponed. But if we're postponing things or delaying things just because we don't have all the information, we're not going to ever have all the information unless we wait another month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. And we need to start somewhere, and we need to start moving in any direction, or it's going to be another 2 years of people in bikes and wheelchairs and strollers not able to access, you know, one of our best resources and assets in the community. So I don't think this limits us. We can make a future motion to change it if we get this information that comes back and says we need 175 to do everything we need to do. Then it comes to council and we make a motion to approve an increase of $50,000 to the funding to the ramp project. So we still have a lot of room to do what we need to do. It just allows administration to start somewhere. So thanks for everybody's consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I have Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I cannot support this. I'm going, bring this back to council no later than September 30th, 2021. To me, that's just kicking it down the road 5 months. So if this is approved, we walk out of this meeting and we say to our citizens, we made a decision, we're going to talk about it in 5 months. And there's no guarantee we're going to like what we hear in September. So I cannot support this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor McGoon, and then Councillor Estashi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose an amendment, and if Councillor Nelson sees it as friendly, great. And if not, we can debate it then. So what I'd like to include is, and I'm just having a look at the original motion, that the Maxwell Lake bridge ramps be constructed and that the overall height of the bridge and balustrades be reduced with a budget of $175,000, and that the project scope, details, timeline, and deliverables come back to council no later than the end of May 2021. And if I could just speak to that for a second, Your Worship. Basically, in listening to Councillor Nelson's request to seek some kind of amendment, and I mean, this also hints at the direction I'm willing to go if the direction on the floor doesn't pass. Basically, what I'd like to see is a plan from administration to lower the height of the bridge and the balustrades. But I can't commit to the original $125,000 only that Councillor Nelson suggested, because obviously we're trying to take into account the cost of lowering the bridge as well. So again, basically this would request administration to bring this plan back to, or that this would go ahead but we'd have to receive a report from administration on what the overall scope looks like before the end of May, which of course tries to keep us on track for construction this year. By the sounds of it, administration indicated that they had discussed this possibility with the engineering firm. So hopefully this isn't too far out of left field and that this is something and a timeline that's possible. If it's not, I'd certainly be willing to listen to administration and the requests for adjusting that timeline. I'm not sold on the end of May. I just wanted to put something in there that demonstrated to council that the goal is to have this process continue to be accelerated so that we are in fact taking action and not just kicking the can down the road, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. If I could just ask Ms. Anderson if she could do a copy and paste back into the chat, that's at least helped me quite well. I don't know if everyone else could see the motion on the floor. And with that, I'll go to CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. To first comment on the timeline, it won't be possible to bring this back before the end of May. There's quite a lot of work that goes into pinning down the costs, especially if we're looking to go to RFP to really understand what the market will support. So the end of May, it's not possible. It would be more like the end of July before something like that could come back to council. I'll look to Mr. Rousseau to provide just a little bit more context.
Mr.
Thank you, CEO Olson, through the chair, Mr. Mayor and council. The timeline is indeed very tight. It's not doable because, as CEO Olson just mentioned, that we do have to go out and get the actual market value, which means you're including contractors' time. And so to me, a more doable time would be to get it towards the end of July, because we're already at the end of April. And if we get direction tonight, then we have to put the wheels in motion. Back to the councillor's comment, one is that, yes, we had conversations regarding cost and the options, but that is just preliminary of the cost conversations. Nothing has been determined or put to paper. Finally, just on the 125,000 and the 175,000 that now includes lowering the bridge. It's good to work with a bottom line number, but so we can live with that. However, if the cost does come in greater, as Councillor Nelson said, we can adjust it because we do have budget capacity in the grant itself. One thing that's helpful for us as administration, I've heard that council is leaning towards pedestrian only access. So that helps with the reduction of the cost with pile spacing and member sizing. So that can definitely help us to get direction to go with the option you prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Follow-up? Councillor Magoon? Yeah.
Yeah, just your worship, then I am comfortable if somebody wants to amend the date to the end of July to give administration that time to put the proposal and information together. Again, I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. With that, I'll go to Councillor Stashik and then Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Before you go to me, though, I do have a bit of a concern. Councillor Magoon had indicated this was potentially a friendly amendment, potentially not. But I would have a question to administration if this even qualifies as an amendment. This is changing the original intent of the, or changing the intent of the original motion significantly, to me, more than simply as an amendment. But I think we need to look to Councillor Nelson at first to see if that's something he's willing to accept. And if not, then I would want to look to administration to see if this is even an amendment or not. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stashik. I'll go to Councillor Nelson, even though I don't believe this is allowed as a friendly amendment. But would you even consider it if allowed as a friendly amendment, Councillor Nelson?
The date, absolutely friendly on. The rest of the stuff, that's far too, that changes the intent a bunch. So I don't think it should be a friendly amendment, but the date doesn't likely change anything, and I would be amenable to that. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. CEO Olson.
Ms. Randall.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it's a friendly amendment either. You could deal with his or Councillor Magoon's motion and then go back to the main one from Councillor Nelson.
But not as a friendly amendment.
Not as a friendly amendment, that's correct.
C. Olson?
Oh,
Was
did
there-
you, sorry, Mayor
I
Michaels,
did
did you hear
totally.
Ms. Randall?
Did all of council understand that?
I have a follow-up if I can.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we can address Councillor Magoon's amendment and then go back to the original motion, because Magoon's amendment, it materially changes the original motion. It's, to me, that's not an amendment, it's a different motion. So I'm not, with respect to administration, if Magoon's amendment's accepted, there's nothing to go back to. It's completely changed the original motion.
Councillor Magoon, you had your hand up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, I agree with council on this. If it was accepted as a friendly amendment, the reason for me putting this forward early, this is sort of in my back pocket as if Councillor Nelson's motion failed, but he had requested any kind of support looking for potential amendments. That's why I brought this forward, was hoping for a merging of the two. If he's unwilling to accept it as a friendly amendment, then I would agree that it shouldn't stay on the table, and I'd be more than happy to withdraw it, deal with Councillor Nelson's motion. If it's unsuccessful, then everybody can see sort of the direction that I'm looking to go. So there you have it.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. So my understanding, Councillor Nelson, minus the date, was not amenable as a friendly amendment. So with that, Councillor Magoon, are you withdrawing your motion?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm withdrawing my amendment. I would agree with my fellow councilors. I don't think it's appropriate in that it does change the spirit if it's not accepted. And so in this case, I will simply wait my turn.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, any objections to withdrawing the amendment? Seeing none, that is withdrawn. We are back to the motion. I think I had the cue originally back to Councillor Stashik, Councillor Waugh, and Councillor Hawes. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Yes, I did. I was in queue to speak to the original motion, and it was a question, it was a comment and then a question to administration, I guess, and it's regarding the timeline of it. I appreciate that it's got the qualifier no later than September 30th, but I just do have some concerns if there's going to be an ability to potentially take advantage of some of the potential synergy that could be realized by having a contractor who might be interested in doing this work, who's also in a similar timeline working on the Beaver Boardwalk part, that we would likely want to have our ducks in a row and decisions made on that substantially before the potential start date. So I'd look to administration to see if there's an ability, and I think this has already been answered, to be able to move that September 30th date forward. And I believe I heard, sometime in July would be achievable. And if that was the case, I would support changing that to be able to move the timeline forward. As Councillor Nelson said, I think it's important that we do get some direction on the table and start moving this thing forward so we can get some final resolution on what's going to happen there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Did you want to make that formal request to change the date?
Sure. I would ask for a friendly amendment pending administration speaking to the ability to be able to change that to the date that they suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillors. Stashik. Councillor Nelson, would you be amenable to change this to July 31st?
I would be highly amenable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. And with that, I'll go to administration for any final comment, or not final comments, but regarding this for the amendment of the date to July 31st. CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. The July 31st is achievable.
Thank you very much. With that, we have an friendly amended motion in front of us, Council. So again, on the list, I have Councillor Waugh, Hawes, Nelson, and Magoon. Councillor Waugh.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I have nothing to add that I haven't already stated. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, just a real quick, I appreciate the amendment to the date. I think, the sooner we see this and, administration work on it, then we can see what it might look like, potentially what the deliverables are. Potentially if it needs more budget, then we can entertain that at the time. But it gives then our citizens an opportunity to say, hey, yeah, we are moving forward with this. We will see a design of it of some sort by the end of July, and hopefully hit that in construction in September. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, for council, if council's concerned about this impacting the overall budget of the project, if somebody wanted to make an amendment or a friendly amendment to include verbiage that says with the total project scope or total project budget remaining unchanged, I would happily have that, because that's the intent, is that we still have some room, budget and grant funding to achieve the other things that council or the community or whatever kind of happens between now and whenever the next steps happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And really that is part of my concern, but I do also have a question for administration. If as a councillor I was to vote in favor of this, does that, as Councillor Nelson had mentioned earlier in the meeting, does that preclude us from passing an additional motion where we request administration to also bring back information regarding the lowering of the overall height of the bridge and the balustrades?
Administration.
Mr. Russo?
Yeah. Sorry, I just lost track there. Would you mind repeating that, Emily? Sorry. The question was?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, if we pass the motion that's on the floor right now, outside of the budget concern that I have, does it preclude us from passing an additional motion that directs administration to bring back information regarding lowering the overall height and the balustrades of the bridge itself?
Thank you, Councillor, through to the chair. No, I don't believe it precludes you from bringing back an additional motion.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may sort of seek consensus on a potential friendly amendment then, as Councillor Nelson had mentioned, and we'll see if I can be twice rejected. I'm just looking to see if maybe we might be amenable to changing the wording of with the total project budget of no more than $175,000. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with administration coming back to council and requesting additional funds if that needs to be. But again, I'm just trying to make, some potential room for the lowering of the bridge as we've received feedback on from members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson, are you amenable to that?
I'm not amenable to it. I made this motion really focused on the ramps and what I was comfortable with for a budget on the ramps. And I think it's better to have future motions for other pieces and portions, whether it's connecting, whether it's, saying, if we have $50,000 left over to use it to have a tower that we can find a way to squeeze into that grant, or, however we want to proceed moving forward. But to me, that's the number that I'm comfortable with for ramps right now. And any other, if we're talking about balustrades, that's a new word for me. I don't even know what that is, let alone how much to put towards it. If we're going to be making motions toward different things that we haven't had a lot of background on, such as raising and lowering, I would want a report to come back. So maybe we can allocate, but a report to come back before we move forward with that, just to have a better understanding. The 70 to 80 grand to lower it, the first I've heard of that is at this meeting, and I haven't had any opportunity to reflect or think or consider or cross-reference any of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Stashik.
Sorry, just for clarification, Councillor Magoon had asked for a friendly amendment and Councillor Nelson has said he's not willing to entertain that. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So I'll speak to the motion then. I will support this motion moving forward with the understanding and the hope that there are some additional motions made as perhaps Councillor Magoon was speaking to in regarding changes to the bridge structure itself. However, as a word of caution, putting a total dollar value on the project that's less than what the ISIP grant was is not something I would likely support. If there's additional money, I may have another motion to direct administration post, Councillor Magoon potentially making one on changes to the bridge. If that opportunity to utilize that money's there, I want to make sure that the ability for administration to utilize all of it is still there, regardless of what decisions we make in direction on what's to happen with the ramps and the bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. I have myself and Councillor Race. I'm really on the fence for this one. I want to support this. I think we've at least narrowed down some appetite from the majority of council towards this. I still struggle with what we're going to see by the end of July. To me, and it's in the report, design build is the way to go. So why, I don't know why we're not directing administration to just go do an RFP for a design build of the ramps. We don't have to touch anything else. Let the contractors of the world bring us these options to us. Why are we going to see something before we put out the RFPs? To get what? To get more high-level estimates from administration, speaking with other contractors or other engineers. I don't understand why. I still struggle why we're going down this road. Simply put out a design bid for a ramp is what I believe we should do. This motion, albeit it's partially okay in my books, I still think it's in July we won't even have an RFP out. That's my concern. So again, I think I'm leaning towards supporting it because it doesn't seem like we have an alternative option right now, but that's my concern. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My initial question was, does the 125 include lowering the bridge? And now I know that it doesn't. It would be 125 plus the $80,000 to lower it. And I do have a question for administration. Is the 6 inches the maximum amount that it should or could be lowered?
Administration.
Thank you, CA Olson, through the chair. At this point, there is no maximum or minimum because this was just a conversation had today. Once we look at the integrity of what is in place in the field, we'd be able to understand what the maximum is. However, the maximum will be dictated by how low the bridge can go based on the maximum water elevation at any given time.
Good. And I just have one more comment, sir. I cannot support this. I feel we're in a relationship with this bridge that somebody's got to break this relationship off, and I'm not in favor of moving forward with this. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. And I apologize for my own confusion. I'm going to state it right now. My understanding was that the intent of that motion was that it would go out for RFP and that we would have numbers that come back to us with a maximum approved budget of $125,000. And I'm still a little bit fuzzy on what council's action is when it comes back to council. But my understanding was that was going to be, RFPs go out, bidders bid on it, they present proposals on what they're going to do and how much they're going to charge for it. And then that way it fits in a timeline that construction could start in the fall, potentially alongside or in conjunction with the Beaver Boardwalk construction. So I'd look to anybody that wants to respond to that on what the intent and understanding of the motion was.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Stashik. I hope I'm wrong, but if July 31st is the date where the RFPs are already accepted and that information, then I totally support that. So to administration, is that the understanding of this motion, that the RFP process will be complete and that information will then come to council?
Mayor Michaels, that was our understanding, and that was the reason for moving the timeline out from the end of May into July to give adequate time for us to work through that process.
And if I could follow up, Mayor Michaels, just directly to Councillor Nelson, if I may. I just want to make sure that that was his intent with the motion as well.
Councillor Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councillor Stashik. Yeah, we need to have construction happening this winter. So we need to work backwards from that. And I look to administration more for the timelines and all the process. The what is what the motion, the how, I don't know. Again, it's this line of, I don't know where council's role in the how part is. But the intention is that we do construction this winter, because if we don't do it this winter, we have, well, number one, we likely sacrifice the grant, and we lose another summer, which hopefully will be a non-COVID summer where people can enjoy it and, you know, really flock to a lot of these areas. I don't want there to be another summer without proper access to that area. So yeah, no, I'm the how, I think that's administration's to figure out. And if that's required to be in the motion, I would be amenable to that if there's clarity required. So if administration requires more clarity, just let me know and we can amend it or friendly amendment. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson.
So if I may finish. Yeah, so going back to my original comment, yes, I am supporting this motion fully. I believe it moves everything forward. It sets us on a timeline. It gives direction to administration, and it'll allow some timely work to be done and be able to get some resolution on the bridge and boardwalk, and hopefully make that that whole area a place that the town of Hinton can be proud of, and that our citizens can be proud of and use happily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. And I'll be strongly in favor. Thank you for the clarification on this. My concern was making sure that we had RFPs out and one was selected. And if that can be done within the next 90 days, I'm looking forward to this. So I appreciate this conversation, albeit long. I think we're at a much better place at this moment. So I look forward to supporting this. Council, anyone further before I call this to question? Seeing none. Call to question. That the Maxwell Lake Bridge ramps be constructed to allow pedestrian access only with a budget of $125,000, and that the project scope, details, timelines, and deliverables come to council no later than July 31st of 2021. Council, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried 5-2. Council. Councillor Stashik, then Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I would like to make a motion. I would like to move that the total budget for the Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation project not exceed $251,000. And if I could speak to it.
Yes.
So in recognition of the motion that we just passed, I appreciate that potentially takes care of a portion of it. I think it's quite likely that there's some additional directions that are going to be coming forward for additional expenditures that could be used. And I'm all in favor of taking a look at those, but I do want to make sure that there's the ability to be able to utilize the entire quantity of the ISIP grant, and that is available to administration, and that council understands that. Making this motion absolutely doesn't preclude any additional motions, but I do look forward to those additional motions, but I want it to be capped at the full value of the ISIP grant, and that no Hinton taxpayer dollars are invested in the bridge rehabilitation program without council's approval. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Magoon. Oh, before that, I'll go to C.A. Olson. My apologies.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I just want to clarify within the budget, there was also the 2020 carry forward amount of just under 35,000. The intention is not to include that amount in the rehabilitation project as a whole, but to allow that work to remove the old bridge underneath, utilizing that carry forward to continue as planned. I just want to make sure that that's correct.
So if I may, Mayor Michaels? Yeah, the intent is I'm talking about new stuff moving forward, not the carry forward for work that hasn't been completed under different contracts. If I'm understanding your question correctly, CEO Olson.
CEO Olson.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify the Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation report covered information on both. So I just, and under the financial section, built out both as far as the budgets required. So I just wanted to.
Okay, if the motion needs additional clarification to detail that for administration, I'm happy to accept an amendment that makes that clearer. But yes, the intent is for, new construction, changes to the existing bridge, stuff like that. The carry forward for work that hasn't been completed yet isn't intended to be a part of the $251,000.
I'm fine without any kind of amendment. I just wanted to be certain.
Thank you, CEO Olson and Councillor Stashik. With that, I'll go to Councillor Magoon, then Councillor Nelson.
No, I'd like to remain in the main queue, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a clarifying question. Are there any required matching funds in order to access that complete ISIP grant?
And that's a question for administration. Administration.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Mr. Russo?
Thank you, CEO Olson, through the chair, Mr. Mayor and Council. My understanding is that there is no matching grant component for this ISIP grant of $251,000.
If I could follow up, Mr. Chair, I'm fully in support of this. I just want to make sure that by us not putting in 30, we were losing another 30. And just on the other comment, I had the same understanding as Councillor Ostashik and the interpretation of CEO Olson as far as the removal of the old bridge. But if in this process we could utilize the ISIP grant to pull that out and have that remaining carryover budget go back to reserves, wouldn't break my heart. So, but I'll support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I guess my question to administration, I just want to make sure that I'm not overlooking something. This will max out the total cost of 251, but it has no connection that the pedestrian access budget remains at 125. So that if the bid comes up over 125, that would have to come to council. I just want to make sure there's a clear separation that this doesn't then allow for any excess funds over 125 to be okayed. Am I understanding that clearly, that the ramps would still be 125 max and anything above that would need council approval? Is that correct, CEO Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So for the ramp construction cost, anything over 125 would be brought to council should it be required. This motion allows for any other portion of the Maxwell Lake Rehabilitation Project to proceed under that $251,000 max. So I think we're understanding what council's looking to do.
Thank you, CEO Olson, and thanks for that clarity. I just want to make sure, especially for us and for people who are watching, we're approving 125 for the access connecting the bridge, and these access funds could be for other things. So I just really want to decipher the two, that there will be no implications. If it's over 125, that will be coming back to council, and the public will be made aware that, okay, the connections will potentially exceed that cost. So thanks for that clarity. And with that, I look forward to supporting this motion. Council, any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. that the total budget for the Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation Project not exceed $251,000. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Council, Councilor Magoon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion. Wendy, you haven't received this one, so we're going to have to talk through it. That administration bring a report back to a standing committee meeting regarding the lowering of the Maxwell Lake Bridge and balustrades with costs, timeline, and deliverables to come back to council no later than June 30th, 2021. And if I could speak to that, Your Worship. The only reason I've backed up the date a little bit from what administration had requested previously is, to me, it made no logical sense that we present a plan to council on what the building of ramps will be if the potential angle of those ramps are different. So to me, it seems a material question that we have to decide whether or not the cost and benefit of lowering the bridge is going to be incorporated into the final project prior to deciding on that final report at the end of July. Unless, of course, administration says that we can do both of those things concurrently. And then I'm very happy to adjust that date back up to July 31st. And then I will just sit back and see what council and administration thinks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. With that, I'll go to administration, followed by Councilor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I believe Mr. Russo has some clarifying information and context to provide.
Thank you, CA Olson, through the chair to council. The idea of bringing it back to council the end of July, the thinking was for us as administration to include the potential for lowering of the bridge as well as lowering the balustrade itself so that we can have a true cost and we could use it as a deletable item in the tender itself. So should council decide in July the 31st that that cost is prohibitive or it is no longer the direction you want to go, we don't unbalance the tender itself because it's a deletable item. And in our world, when it's a deletable item, the contractor understands how to price things should it be yanked out of the contract itself. That being said, it also helps us with the design principle to say if it is at a lowering of the bridge, then the grade is 2% for argument's sake. If we don't lower it, the grade is 3.5%. So everybody knows upfront what we're dealing with.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russo. Councilor Magoon, you're okay with that?
Yeah, and if that's the case, then I'm happy amending that date, or I can't amend it, obviously, but I'd be happy with a friendly amendment to move that date back to July 31st.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Councilor Stashik, then Councilor Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I'm not going to be in favor of this, to be honest. I don't want to see another report come back. I would prefer that this was more along the lines of the original amendment that Councilor Magoon was attempting to make to Councilor Nelson's motion. I'd prefer this was a direction to administration to take this and put it out for proposal and attach a number to it. And as Mr. Russo said, it can be a deletable item in the tender. If it comes back, either more than the item or more than the dollar value that is quoted in the motion, or that it's more than the total dollar value the entire rehabilitation project, then council can have a discussion about whether that's something that they want to provide additional funding to or not. I'd prefer not to kick it down the road. I'd prefer to make a decision. If this is the path that we're going down, that we're going with a pedestrian only bridge, and that allows us to make accommodations to change the bridge structure, to lower the railing, to offer better sight lines, remove some of the cross rails so the kids can see through better, and to lower the actual bridge deck height itself, to be able to drop the entire bridge structure from the railing all the way down to make it less visually intrusive. I'd prefer that that was just a direction to administration, that that's the path we want to go down. Go out there and get us pricing for it rather than a report. So I won't support this, but if it was a motion to direct administration to go to RFP, I would support that.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Before I go to Councillor Nelson, I saw a lot of head nodding from Councillor Magoon. Councillor Magoon, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, just again, I guess I sort of didn't hope for that positive of an outcome from Councillor Ostashik. And if that's the general consensus of the rest of council, I'd be happy to withdraw for the purposes of submitting a more directly worded motion. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson.
I think if Councillor Magoon is looking to withdraw, I'd happily go. I have nothing specific to add. If the plan is to withdraw, I wouldn't have any opposition to it.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, I'd like to withdraw then and offer a different motion if I'm not trumping Councillor Nelson being in queue.
Okay, Councillor Magoon would like to withdraw this motion. Any opposition to that? Seeing none, the motion is withdrawn. And with that, before I give the floor back to Councillor Nelson, I will call a short 7-minute recess for a bio break, and we'll reconvene at approximately 6:25. Hello, everyone. I'd like to reconvene this meeting at 6:28. We are still on our third action item for this evening. And with that, I will go to Councillor Nelson.
I'll withdraw. Thank you.
Councillor Magoon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion. And then Wendy, I'll just wait till you're ready. That administration incorporate the lowering of the Maxwell Lake Bridge and balustrades in the Maxwell Lake Bridge Plan due to be presented no later than the end of July 2021. And if I could speak to that quickly, Your Worship. Again, I think that that identifies some of the more direct concerns that were laid out by my fellow councillors. Again, this puts us on a direct path for seeing what the impact of this is and deciding whether or not to incorporate it due to overall costs on the final plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. I have Councillor Nelson and Councillor Hawes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I had a question that we've kind of talked about the lowering of the bridge, the adjustment of the railings, as well as the adjustment of the abutting boardwalk. I'm wondering if if council has an appetite to do those all in the same, I personally would. I think we want to look at all of those things and have them come back. If they have to come back individually, I'm fine with that too. And then whether or not we're attaching a budget dollar amount to this, and if it's all of those things together, then potentially using all of the remainder would be something I'd really support. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Haas and Ostashik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I'm in support of this, definitely. I think that, you know, we've heard it abundantly clear from the, you know, community in regards to the aesthetics of it and the lowering of it. You know, I think I'm of the same mind of Councillor Nelson, that if it, you know, is a little broader than this, you know, in regards to it, and that a budget amount be placed on it, you know, for administration as well, and for the, you know, potentially the RFDs. So I appreciate hearing from the rest of the council on this one, but I do wish this to be part of either this or, you know, if there's amendments made to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haas. Councillor Ostashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Yeah, the only thing that's preventing me from supporting this right now is a maximum dollar amount budget that council's comfortable with. I think it's important to pick a number that council's comfortable with, and then that way, if the proposals come back representing a dollar value that's higher than that, then it comes to council for council's decision about whether they think the extra dollar is worth the extra value. And in terms of bundling some things, I would prefer that it not be bundled, especially if we're adding a maximum budget dollar amount. I'm kind of rolling around in my head an additional motion that might be able to be used, you know, if depending on how much extra money there is left over at the end. My concern is that if it's all bundled together and it's to a maximum of $126,000, the whole 126 gets invested in lowering the bridge, and we don't get any boardwalk extension. So, and that number is nothing to go by. That was just the remainder of the budget. So that's what I would need to see to support moving this forward, is a budget number on it that council's comfortable with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ostashik. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I would be comfortable if a fellow councillor wanted to make an amendment. You know, putting the total budget on this somewhere around, I think it was $76,000, and then seeing what information administration brings back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. I have a few comments for this one. Some of the numbers before kind of struck me, but I was leaving it for this section in hopes that this comes up. I hope we put a cap on it, but also if we're going to lower it at the lower amount of 150 millimeters, that's only 5.9 inches. I know I don't support spending $75,000 to lower it 5.9 inches. I think the community will think that's ridiculous for only such a small amount. We're talking, this bridge is high. I don't know how exactly the measurements, but it seems like 4 or 5 feet from the ground. 5.9 inches. There's almost no money amount that I would support. To me, I don't know how we tie a minimal length, but that's sort of where my mind is going. It has to be at least a foot to lower 5.9 inches. So just throwing that out to council on how we want to maybe move forward with a dollar amount and a minimum distance in order to get value for that amount, even though it's grant money. I'm hoping 18 inches would be ideal minimum. So with that, Councillor Hawes.
So to that, and I wanted to ask it earlier. I know, Mr. Russo, you mentioned this, that it's about 30 centimeters. That in my calculation is actually 12 inches. Isn't that what you mentioned earlier? Because you talked about it being only about 6 inches, but that's actually 12 inches lowered if it's a full ruler, correct?
Mr. Russo?
Through the chair to council, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Haas. What I was saying is that I went from 150 to 300 millimeters. So when I
Right.
showed the ruler, that is that as you said, that's the depth that you could go as a maximum based on a conversation I had today with the engineers not having checked it, because the lower we go, the further the impact to should the water level rise, you could have it submerged partially. What is the engineering requirements to take care of the lateral sway of any ice or snow that may push the bridge in future? So it is definitely considerations, but the raw length is what I was referring to as the maximum.
Maximum. So that might answer, if I may, your concern there, Mayor Michaels, that it potentially could be that 12 or that foot lowered potentially. So, which and if I may, I mean, my number, would be setting it personally at about 75,000, giving, potentially that might be, and then going off and seeing what if that is a feasible amount to do that. I perceive that doing what we're asking is not a small job. It is a significant, I think, endeavor, probably based on what I've seen myself of the bridge. I'm assuming that there's a lot to doing that and cutting chunks and making sure that it's also then still feasibly stable, obviously. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howes. With that, I'll go back to Mr. Russo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through the council. I just wanted to add that when we look at the lowering of the bridge, we will look at the absolute maximum that we can achieve. And the engineers will tell me that the deeper you go, the more the reinforcement is going to be. But as in engineering, as we say, anything is possible. It's just the cost that's attached to it, and to make sure that the serviceability of it will be there for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I had a question for administration. Sorry, maybe I'll leave that for a second, but based on the comments that Mr. Russo made earlier, the estimation was, I believe it was 75 to 80,000 to lower the bridge. If administration could confirm that, was that the number? And I didn't realize that is a really, really rough, estimate, that's not based on anything other than holding your thumb up and going like that, right? So was that the number that was given?
Administration?
Okay. With that said, then I would actually like to see that the allowed budget be a little bit higher than that, because other than lowering the bridge deck, I would like to see that the bridge railing gets lowered too, and that there's some opportunity in there to be able to remove some of those cross pieces that go laterally across the bridge railing. They're not required to be as tight as they are per code. I think they're as tight as they are because it's required structurally. And if we're going away from having this have to be a vehicle access bridge and it's going to be pedestrian only, I think from an engineering perspective, it's likely going to be allowable to remove some of those cross pieces, which allows better vision for the small members, the children in our community. And I think they're an important part of utilizing that bridge. Them being able to see through the cross rails on that, to actually see what's happening down in the water is important. So I think adding, giving a little bit of extra leeway to add some allowance for being able to lower and modify the railing part is important as well. I did have a question for administration too, and it's regarding dropping the bridge and the risk that it imposes. I understand in the extenuating flood circumstance, there's a potential that the bridge may wind up being submerged or partially submerged. But with the understanding that that section of water isn't really moving water, what would be the risk in having the bridge temporarily submerged that's trying to be circumvented by having it so high up above the standing water level?
Administration?
So,
thank you, Chair Olsen, through to the Chair, Mayor Michaels. The risk that we face if we do have the bridge lowered at whatever depth we're lowering it to, the submerging will just require, if we don't take care of the lateral reinforcement, then the bridge could sway and you could compromise the bridge structural integrity. But with the conversations I've had with the engineers, that was an element I included should we lower the bridge. So the 80,000 would include that. The second part of it, maybe not as extraneous as the bridge moving, is the maintenance component we have to do on it, because you might have to treat the bridge periodically, plus the planking, plus the steel, those type of things. And that's a 3 to 4 year maintenance criteria that we could build into our asset management. But these are just administrative maintenance aspects. But the bigger item is the lateral movement. Should you have that event that may force the bridge to be compressed with ice or whatever that may be.
If I may follow up there, Michaels, I appreciate that clarification from administration very much. Observationally, though, the current bridge deck is about 3 feet above ground level, which is about 4 to 5 feet above water level. If the water were to come up that much, I appreciate the concern and the effect that that might have on the bridge, but that's likely going to be 3 or 4 feet of water cover over the whole boardwalk. And if that happens, I think we're going to have bigger issues to contend with than that the bridge got submerged. So if this is a direction that council provides and moves ahead with, I would like to see that bridge lowered as much as physically possible within reason. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm struggling with just, again, accomplishing only one thing. So ultimately, I won't vote in favor of this, not because I don't necessarily agree with lowering it. It's more so there could be different ways of achieving a less obtrusive impact on the visual part of it, whether that's changing the railings or lowering the railings. I think there's a lot of things that that could be done to have it fit better within the natural environment. And I would rather have some flexibility to do that. And we may be able to accomplish a lot without actually lowering the bridge itself by just making railings that are further apart and having the colors blend. Like there might be a lot of things that we can do that don't require, again, bringing all the equipment in to do some heavy construction on to lift a bridge, cut some pilings and drop it a bit. I just don't know that it's the best thing that we can do. So if that's the only motion and that's the one thing that we can do, I won't support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, I'll look to support this if there's some changes. I know there's some appetite to put a dollar amount tied to this. I would still prefer minimum height tied to this. I won't die on that hill, but I know it goes without saying, but I don't think any of our motions indicated it. These funds and the 251,000, this is all ISIP money. So I just want to confirm that if the ISIP money does not, sort of support these modified changes, that this would not go through. So that is what I understand is the intent of council with making these motions, that if this comes in at 70, under 75, but it's not approved by ISIP, that's also then not approved and the project's not a go. I just want to clarify that that's the intent. Administration, is that your understanding with these motions? Sierra Wilson?
Yes, that's our understanding. It's all to be funded under the ISIP funding amount.
Okay, thank you for that. So with that, I'll support this with if somebody's willing to make these added cost changes criteria. Councillor Stashik.
Mayor Michaels, I'd like to propose an amendment. To a maximum dollar value of $90,000. And providing a total deck lowering of at least 450 millimeters. So if I could speak to it. If council has a will to split those, that's okay. I was just trying to cover both of the concerns with one amendment. 450 millimeters, for those not super familiar with the metric system, is 18 inches, 1.5 feet. I think if the cost is going to be $70,000 or $80,000, it needs to be something that's measurable, that's going to be actually material. I appreciate Mayor Michael's bringing that up. So that's the reasoning for putting that in there. And I think 90,000 is a reasonable budget to give administration some allowance to be able to potentially drop the overall deck height and do some railing modifications to help with sight lines and visual impact of the structure. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have an amendment on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
Just want to seek clarification. I don't believe the motion or the amendment would give administration direction to change the railings. And I would love for that to be incorporated, because I would love for that to happen. If I'm missing something, please let me know. Thank you.
Point of clarification.
Yeah, it's balustrades is railings. So just was that your question, Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. With that, Councillor Stashik.
I do agree with Councillor Nelson somewhat. Yeah, the balustrade is the railing, but I believe the motion just speaks to the railing height, not modification of it to remove anything to improve lines of sight or anything. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Or is it in the chat box? Sorry. Yeah, it just talks about lowering it. So I don't know if administration needs some additional wording in there to clarify, modifying the railings and balustrades to improve sight lines or something like that. I don't know. Or is the intent clear? I'd throw that back to Councillor Nelson, Councillor Magoon.
Well, with that, I'll go to CEO Olsen if she has a comment on the, I know there's an amendment on the floor but the original motion, is the understanding that modifications to the balustrades would be done, or is it just lowering? What is administration's understanding of that wording?
I'll let Mr. Russo.
Yes, so thank you, Chair Olsen, through the council. Our understanding is that it is just the lowering of the bridge, not the alterations or modifications to the railing/balustrades.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Russo. With that, I'll go to Councillor Magoon because I believe his intention was different.
Yeah, I have a couple of points then, Your Worship. If we could have a look at the wording of the motion on as it's been written. So again, to speak to some of the concerns, that administration incorporate the lowering of the Maxwell Lake Bridge and balustrades in the Maxwell Lake Bridge plan. And to speak to Councillor Ostashik's concern, I certainly agree. The intention of my original motion, lay in modification of the balustrades, not in simply just lowering their height. And to this point, it hasn't been asked yet whether or not I would accept the maximum dollar amount and the deck total lowering as friendly amendments, and certainly the modification, since it's been brought up as well. I don't think either of those three issues changes the intent of my motion. And I would be very happy to accept all three of those as friendly amendments, if that's possible.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Stashik.
In that case, I'd be happy to put forward my proposed amendment as a friendly amendment and also include the word, modification, however that works, the modification of the balustrades and railing.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stachik and Councillor Magoon administration for that. And I'll look to Miss Anderson when she's done amending that.
I'm okay with that, Mayor Michaels, as long as Council Magoon accepts it as a friendly amendment.
Councillor Magoon, you would be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely accept that as a friendly amendment. And whenever it's convenient, Your Worship, I'd like to go in queue.
Okay. I'll just give Miss Anderson a moment to combine the two. And please let me know if that doesn't illustrate your intention. And with that, Councillor Stachik, anything further?
No, that should be good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Anderson. Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, just while we're debating this, Your Worship, I think it's important to note because we have a number of people I've noticed that are actually watching and following along and messaging and active on social media tonight. Just for the public's consideration, I've received notifications from a number of people that it's already being announced that council's passed this motion on social media. We have not. I'd like to take a moment on camera at this point in time to say there are elements of social media trying to say that this has been passed. It has not been voted on yet. If it does pass, that's great. But again, there's always that difference between what's being reported on social media and what's actually happened in truth. And I would like to take a moment to point that out. That is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor that's been amended. Any further questions or comments? I'll be speaking in favor of this. I appreciate the collaboration. I think a foot and a half is a reasonable length as a minimum. $90,000 tied to the ISIP grant is important. And this hopefully really puts the input of the community, the overall desire to have access there, but for the right use, with the right aesthetics, with the right purpose. And I believe today this brings us closer to what the community in essence wants. So I'll be speaking in favor of this. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be speaking in favor of it as well, providing, as we've come to understand, that it would be a deletable item. And the reason I say that, we might get a visual drawing of what it looks like with the ramps leading up to the bridge, and then a subsequent visual of what it looks like with the ramps leading up to the bridge with it lowered by 18 inches. And it could look absolutely no different whatsoever. And in that case, whether it's a grant or direct municipal taxpayer dollars that's funding it, we still have to respect that. So I think once the ramps are up, the actual height could become less of an issue, or it could look hugely different. I look forward to seeing what that looks like and making that final decision at that time. So I appreciate the work council's done on this. I think we're really on the right track to kind of respect citizens as a whole and making sure that service is still there. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Hawes.
Yeah, and I too speak for in favor of this motion, and just want to also, thank the community members that brought this forward. I think this is a reasonable compromise to a lot of people's, that may still want it totally removed, but I still think that, it still serves a good purpose for the boardwalk, I think, and I'm looking forward to see what the designs look like moving forward. And as to Councillor Nelson's, too, till we see it up or down, it's still an option, and having it that deletable is, I think, a great option than moving forward. So I'm definitely in support of this as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Stachik.
Actually, I'm okay. Thank you. Mayor Michaels, you can take me on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just about the way that motion reads now that it's been amended. Should modifications and balustrades be switched? And the okay, sorry, I was looking at it in the chat. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Anything further?
Yeah,
Councillor?
I'll be speaking in favor of this. I think Councillor Nelson brought up a good point. Going back to what Mr. Rousseau advised us on, is that this could be removed if needed once everything comes back. But I like the parameters that have been put in place. If we're going to lower it, it makes sense to lower it to a noticeable amount and see what that'll cost us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Council, anything further before I call to question? Seeing none. Call to question that administration incorporate the lowering of the Maxwell Lake Bridge and the modification of the balustrades in the Maxwell Lake Bridge plan due to be presented no later than January 31st of 2021 to a maximum dollar value of $90,000 and providing a total deck lowering of at least 450 millimeters. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this item this evening? Councillor Nelson.
This is a question for clarification. Does administration have what they need in order to make sure we're dealing with the abutting boardwalk? Will that be incorporated in the motion that around the ramps, or is there a separate motion or direction needed to make sure that we achieve connectivity from that, one chunk of boardwalk that connects to the side of the bridge, kind of?
C. Olson.
Mayor Michaels, that is not included in the motions that council's put forward, and some additional direction would be required. The ramps themselves do not include connectivity to the abutting boardwalk that isn't useful at this point.
C. Olson or Councillor Nelson.
Just offhand, does anybody know the trail section that we have letters and numbers for trails? Just informing a motion, or I guess it could just be using the term abutting, we need to make some sort of a motion to make sure that that we achieve that connectivity. So I would just, I guess, look to admin and the rest of council of how to achieve that, unless we want to just leave it and see where we go with the rest of the boardwalk. But to me, I think citizens would want that. They would assume that that would be included and that it would reconnect again.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I actually agree. I would be remiss that we move forward with this and somebody bids on it and there's no real insight on connecting it, which could cause us another problem for this. So I would happily like to have some direction that indicates the option to connect to this based on what's been put forward by council. With that, Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. That aligns with a motion that I wanted to make, but I wanted to make sure that the primary ones, if there was an interest from council, had been addressed first. And I'm gonna have to look to administration for some help with wording. I'm gonna lay out the gist of the intent, and I'm completely open to changing up the wording so that so it's legislatively correct, but it would be to move that. Any remaining funding in the Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation Project. Be utilized to extend boardwalk connectivity from the north and / or south bridge ramps to existing boardwalk or trail sections. Well, that was off the cuff, winging it, and I looked to administration and even to the rest of council. I'm completely amenable to changes to that to clarify the wording, but the intent is that any of the funds that are left over after the bridge ramps and bridge modifications are done be utilized within the parameters of the ISIP grant to be able to extend those bridge ramps out as we can to try and tie them into existing boardwalk or trail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. With that, I'll go quickly to administration if they have any comments on the wording of this. CEO Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. That is my understanding. So that after the primary, I guess, intentions of council are understood or accounted for, the remaining funds through that ISIP grant would be put towards that boardwalk connectivity. So if the maximum upsets that are within the motions that council put forward tonight, then we would have the remaining amount to look at connecting those pieces of boardwalk. Should the lowering of the bridge not go ahead, there's funds within that that council could approve to move ahead with connecting those pieces of boardwalk. So I think we're understanding what the intention is of this.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Stashik?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. And I'd leave it up to administration, but if there's a way that could form part of the RFP process as another expandable item, I don't know, it could be perhaps a lineal meter per square meter. I'm not sure, because we're not really certain at this point how much, if any, money is going to be left over. If that could be incorporated somehow, that might put a reasonably decent bow on the RFP process, that it could all be packaged up together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Any questions or debate? Oh, sorry, if we can just go, I cannot see. Was there any questions or debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question. That to move that any remaining funding in the Maxwell Lake Bridge Rehabilitation Project be utilized to extend boardwalk connectivity from the north and or south bridge ramps to existing boardwalk or trail sections. Council, all those in favor? And that's passed unanimously. Council, anything further for this item? Seeing none, thank you very much, administration and the public and council. Looking a little bit long, but I think we've made some great progress today, so well worth it. So thank you very much. With that, we will go to our fourth item. And just prior to that, seeing that it is 7:06, council will have some consideration momentarily to see if we want to extend this. We have two more items. One is fairly large. It's the fifth item. I'm not saying that the fourth one I want to rush, but just some consideration for us later to either extend or choose to move the short-term rental workshop to another date and time. But with that, we'll go with our fourth item, Recreation Center Grant Readiness Report, CAO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. In early March 2021, Council provided direction to bring forward a report that considered Hinton's position and preparedness in beginning to apply for grants to support potential movement on a recreation center or aquatic center project. Mr. Rousseau has reviewed the studies and reports pertaining to this project from the last decade or more. and has concluded that the town can effectively proceed with an expression of interest to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Grant, and further can pursue the availability of stacking grants. Mr. Rousseau has also provided information within this report to support an integrated project delivery model for continuation of the project. At this time, I will turn things over to him to take us through some of the analysis that he's done to provide that information and potential direction for council tonight. Mr. Rousseau.
Thank you, CA Olson, through the chair to council. It's been my privilege to wade through since the year 2007 to about 2018-19 for various studies that you've undertaken in your town to ascertain what is your best option to either expand your recreation facility or to repurpose and upgrade some of your facilities right now. Based on what I've seen and what I've extrapolated, I think we're in a pretty good position to not spend any further dollars on any further studies or renderings to get a grant ready. I also had the opportunity to talk to Edson, their finance department, and I managed to get a copy of their grant application, which guided my information sharing with council here tonight. That basically there was some, I don't want to say holes, but shortcomings in their application, which was totally understood. So for argument's sake, there's an Indigenous component that needs to be complied with. They defer that should the grant be applied for. But should the grant be awarded, then they'll apply for that. So there's a lot of concessions that can be made. So in short, based on the several pages in front of you, we have enough materials should the grant portal open, which we're hoping by late, early fall, through the province, because it's a two-stage approach. One, we submit an expression of interest first to the province. That goes through as a potential green light for the project to go to the province then. So we'll do an expression of interest first, hopefully by the end of the fall. If the expression of interest meets the criteria, based on the information we have, then we go further to the physical application, then it gets rubber stamped by the province, and then it goes to the feds for final approval. One of the things that I did mention in this is that based on the town's debt capacity and the competing other capital projects, you're probably in your best interest to go for a grant support of nothing less than 65% of the total project value. Looking at what Edson has done, they've got a grant awarded to them that's in the region of about 71%. So minimum of 65%. If you get more, the better it is, then your debt limit is reduced, and or you can repurpose any additional funding for the capital needs. That being said, I mean, if the grant portal opens by late fall, we'll be ready to submit a expression of interest. I'm not expecting that the grant application for the expression of interest will change materially based on what I've seen. It looks like from Edson's example. Furthermore, I've also thrown in a concept of an integrated project delivery approach. And maybe I should just explain a little bit what that is. Formally, council to date, what you've done, you've basically got an architect to give you a rendering, you went out for stakeholder engagement, you've got a profitable cost. What I'm seeking to achieve through this recommendation is that we do an all-in architect, engineer, contractor, stakeholder engagement right from the start, where you actually can peg it down what your project value would be. Within that, any change orders are almost completely eliminated through no matter what comes up, because the contractor was part of the initial design. So if any challenges arise on the site, they can basically amend the design on the fly without charging the client for that change order. So what happens is in the IPD process, they basically build in certain profit margins for themselves. And so if they do have a change order, if it's not driven by the client, their profit margin decreases. And if the project does very well, exceptionally based on value-added engineering and construction practices, you can actually get value added to your project to do more if you want to repurpose the savings back into the project. So that's the idea of an IPD. Yes, it's an upfront cost to coordinate all of that. You may have to get a Hinton-based project manager that's just dedicated on that, but it pays off handsomely based on my own experience of two projects. One project completed and one that's underway right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russo and administration. Councilor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I just want to say thanks. That was, I read through the package, but that was really helpful and informative, actually. I think that added even a lot more comfort to what I got out of the proposal read so far. It's great to hear that we're poised for really the first time in a very long time to not have to follow up with another report or another study of some sort, that we can actually go after some grant funding, and that there's a model that will help us get there. So I appreciate that. Your Worship, I'd like to make the motion that council direct administration to pursue an expression of interest EOI process completed by fall 2021 to ascertain if the proposed capital improvements subscribe and aligns with Investing in Canada infrastructure program, ICIP outcomes, and in parallel consider pursuing the integrated project delivery model to undertake the project.
And did you want to speak to that, Councilor Magoon?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think this is just continuing to go forward and really see if the funding is there to get this project off the ground. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. We've done a lot of research over a lot of years about making this project come to life, and we are getting to the point where it comes down to money. And if we can get 71% of it funded through grant funding, I think it takes what we were concerned would be an expensive project and makes it a very tangible reality. And I think that would benefit our citizens and, of course, our neighboring residents from other communities who come in and take advantage of these facilities. And really, that just benefits all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councilor Nelson and Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, what project are we funding? Are we funding an entire rec center? Are we funding an aquatic center? What are we funding? Because council hasn't, I believe at last check-in, we were building a new aquatic center, not a recreation center. That interpretation is something that would certainly impact the way I handle moving forward with this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson. Cia Olson.
Mr. Russo.
Thank you, Cia Olson, to the chair, to council. The understanding based on my rationale, how I got to this point, was to have an expansion for an aquatic facility, not a recreation facility, but to do any upgrades in the current recreation facility as part of the project, which encompasses the expansion for an aquatic facility.
Councilor Nelson? Or?
I think I'm okay for right now, but I'll go back in the queue if there's others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nelson and Mr. Russo for that. Councilor Race.
Thank you, sir. I think my question was very similar. I'm thinking 71% of what? 35 million, 70 million? So I didn't have a figure to go by. So I think he's answered that question.
Council administration, did you understand that question, or?
I believe so, Mr. So.
Yes, I did understand the question. So basically, if you go back to former reports, I'm not expecting your council to recall any of this because there's so much information that has passed by, but it was based on a $36 to $40 million total capital cost. So it would be 65% of the $36 or $40 million cost that is anticipated at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Russo and Councilor Race. Councilor Nelson.
Yeah, this is to me cart way before the horse. It's been a few years since we've really gone out to the public to talk about what we want to do with this rec center. We've learned a lot since then. We've seen what grants have accomplished for other municipalities, and I think a conversation with the public, if we have 65% in mind and we look at our debt levels and look at all those things, I think the vision from the community of what they'd want to see in a recreation center would be very different than what we last talked about, which was an expansion of an aquatic center and big empty chunk of a building that we don't know what we're doing with. So to me, we need to know what we're doing at least at a high level, and understanding that the intake and EOI and all that isn't till fall. I think there's some work we could do between now and then to make sure we're not chasing after something that no longer fits what the community's looking for. So with that in mind, I won't support this, although I love the concept of going and getting grants to help fund a rec center. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, I think it should come back to us, just if for no other reason than have a refresher as to what the plans were the last time we talked about them. And I do believe Councillor Nelson's correct. I don't know if we had a defined vision for that vacant space where the current pool is. So I think I don't mind moving ahead with this motion, but I think we should have an adjoining motion later on to further define what it is we're putting in a grant for, or an expression of interest for. So it'll help council, it'll help admin, and it'll help the public, just to make sure we're not wasting too much effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Before I go to administration, maybe this will help. I don't want to anticipate any answer, but it was really positive to hear the IPD process. I've always said design bid build is archaic, and it's the most cost prohibitive for municipalities, because developers know exactly what the budget and the design is, and a $100,000 project usually comes in at $99,900. Design build is pretty good, and IPD is the best. So my understanding is that the consultation with the public and what is within it is changeable within the IPD process. This is not us going forward and saying this is the one design. This is the magic of the new process to say, hey, we want to build a rec center there, but we can change the pieces. We can work with the community and build what we want. It's working hand in hand together. If I misunderstand this process, maybe with some of the previous comments, administration, any clarity on those concerns, and what I said is that somewhat accurate, or any insight regarding that?
Mr. Russo. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. You are 99% correct in terms of your interpretation of what the IPD process will do. It will have a stakeholder engagement, it will have renderings. You can actually walk people through a 3D model, and they can actually get a feel of what it would look like. The one little point I will make is that maybe to the cost, that we did not determine, are we buying a Cadillac or we buying a Toyota? And so the $40 million, the $40,035,000 that I'm mentioning is basically what I extrapolated to the bare minimum. It's an aquatic facility with certain things being omitted. So I think to Councillor Nelson's point, that is probably what you want clarity on, because the IPD team is going to be looking for that, so that we don't come back with something too grand and the community cannot afford to stand behind it.
Thank you for that clarity, Mr. Russo. Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, and if I could just follow up then on Mr. Russo's last comment, Mr. Administration, but it would still be possible to pass this recommended action, but then as a follow-up piece, as mentioned by Councillor Waugh, we can proceed with that public engagement prior to the, sort of the culmination of the IPD model sort of taking effect, to get those specific details hammered out, which I think addresses Councillor Nelson's concerns. We can still get fine details as we move down the road in parallel, rather than waiting for a public engagement piece and then we'll do, you know what I mean? Because then really what we're doing is we're potentially limiting our ability to get grants moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Mr. Russo, any comments on that?
Yeah, nothing precludes us, council, to not run a parallel process, because quite a bit of time has elapsed since the public, even yourselves, have seen what I'm referring to, because I've looked at the information very recently. So to run a parallel process to get a pulse from the public, this is all pre-COVID, and so maybe the mindsets have changed, maybe the needs have changed, and maybe it's something we defer. I mean, nothing is committed, even if we go to the expression of interest, you are not committed to anything as funding. It's just a process that's already just put in place so that you can be in time and make it for the window when that portal does open.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russo. Before I go to Councillor Nelson, CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I just wanted to confirm that the intention of this report was to satisfy the motion that council passed to direct administration to bring back a grant readiness report concerning the recreation to council. So that's what we look to include here. Are we ready to start looking for grants or potential grants? Is there more information that's needed and more to this process? Absolutely. But the intention of the report and the work that Mr. Russo did was to kind of look at some comparable communities like Edson to see at what point did they start going out for grants. And he had indicated in his introduction that they did have some significant gaps in what they were moving forward with, and were able to get there as well. So that's what we were intending to bring forward, to say that we can start looking at grants and we have enough information to go on. But there is more to that process, and there's more questions that need to be answered as well.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If this motion is approved, does it allow us to move down a path of exploring a new recreation center? And the reason I asked that question is, a decade ago, we were there are reports saying we're about a decade away from the rinks needing replacement. And so some of these things, when these conversations started, were a long ways from end of life, but are a lot closer to end of life. I've also heard, and I would appreciate your opinion on it, the costs of retrofitting and repurposing can spiral out of control as compared to a new build, especially with the IPD process. And I just want to make sure we're able to have that conversation, because I don't want to get 3 years from now and the community says, you guys should have just built a new one if you would have just asked a few questions 3 years ago. So I want to make sure we're able to have that conversation, both with the experts and also with the community.
CEO Olson.
Mr. Russo.
Thank you, CEO Olson, through the chair. Councillor Nelson, to address the first, you're right. To do a greenfield build, meaning on a new location, is often, I shouldn't say cheaper, but more cost effective when it comes to getting things up to code, getting it more of a greener building, or trying to band-aid an existing facility. That being said, in the process going forward, you can have a parallel process again. Do we go new rec? Do we go retrofit expansion? And the team can help you out to say, this is your better option, A or B.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russo. Councillor Nelson.
So I can follow up. Where I'm struggling is that we've had multiple motions on the table to move forward with the rec center. And my fear is, unless it's accomplished somewhere in the motion, is that right now we could have a parallel process, but there's nothing saying that we will have a parallel process. So I would look to fellow councillor administration, how we can ensure that that a parallel process happens along with the motion that's already on the table. Otherwise, I wouldn't support it, because I need that certainty that we're going to do the work that we need to do, so that if we get to the point of having grants, we know what we're doing. So I'm struggling a little bit with how to ensure that this moves forward in a logical sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council. Any questions or debate? I'll be speaking in favor. To me, this is the first step. This allows administration to go down this path. I think there's opportunity, whether it's after this motion or at another meeting. This could be in a month from now or a few months from now, in order to kind of move things along. But administration needs to know, are we interested in beginning this process to be prepared to apply for grants? So I'm comfortable moving forward and looking forward to council gaining clarity for other things through bringing that forward to council and discussing with the public and getting that assurance that some of us might be seeking. Council, any further debate or questions before I call this to question? Councillor Nelson.
in the motion, it talks about considering the IPD. What does it mean to administration when council is making a motion to consider something?
Administration?
Thank you, Chair Olson. When we use the word consider, it is because it's a new concept that we've never talked about throughout the studies that were done. And so when we say consider, so should the grant be approved hypothetically, that you could then use part of the grant funding to fund the IPD process, because the IPD process is not undertaken by administration. We simply contribute, but you have the specialists come to the table and they will charge a certain cost for preparing all of these packages and going through the iterations, giving you true cost. So that considering it today as an option, it doesn't mean it's a new introduction by the time the grant arrives, because then we can include that cost of the IPD during the grant application as well.
Perfect. Thanks for that. I just want to make sure we kind of knew what we were doing. I agree with all of the things that Mayor Michaels talked about with, you know, the traditional processes that have existed. So, yeah, I'm struggling with this motion as a whole, but I think I'm going to support it. I struggle with, you know, we have motions on the table that largely already accomplish this that we haven't addressed. Like if you look at, on October 18th, that was direct administration to present recreation project funding plan options by the end of December 31st, 2018. That's basically what we're doing. So what do we then do with all the motions with the rec center? Like how do we actually get some next steps that move the project forward when we have, you know, multiple outstanding motions around it? Like what do we do next, I guess, is where I am. Look, I need to know that before I can support a motion to go grab grants.
Administration, any clarity on what would be the next step? I don't want to paraphrase Councillor Nelson, but the next steps for council, when would we be dealing or talking about anything rec center? Is this potentially in a month, 2 months? What would that look like?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. So I know that we have discussed in the past what to do with the outstanding motions and whether they still represent council's intended direction. And we had reviewed them at when we reviewed the action pending list. And I believe it was around that time that the motion to bring back the grant readiness report was put forward. So that would provide a bit of clarity to some of those next steps, I suppose, as far as beginning to apply for grants, and Councillor Nelson is correct in that it achieves a bit of the funding plan, not in its entirety, but partially if we can understand what grants are available to us to move the project forward. As far as next steps go, I don't know that we have the answer to that tonight. I think this is the first piece of it, understanding council's appetite to move into an IDP process. It's different than maybe what we've talked about before. There's more information that administration can prepare and bring back. So I don't know that we have the next step. Dealing with these motions is part of that, and that could potentially be achieved in through the next action pending list discussion with some additional information, or potentially a follow-up report that deals with clearing those off. I don't know, Mr. Russo, if you had anything additional to add as far as your view on next steps.
Well, my understanding, thank you, Chair Olson, through the chair. My understanding was that if the motion carries tonight for us to pursue grant opportunities that may come available between now and the end of fall, that we would be ready to apply for that. Of course, there'll have to be a letter of support that comes from council motion at the time as well. So my understanding is that we'd be going forward with grant applications for an aquatic facility plus some refurbishment on the existing recreation facility. We could also, now that I've heard Councillor Nelson's input, which is very relevant, that we could have the grant to be contingent upon, should we not just to be very focused on one element, that we could look at totally replacing the rec center and repurposing whatever, or maybe making redundant what we have right now. So that's a good element to include in the grant application. So that's how I understand the next steps is about grant application readiness.
Councillor Nelson, any follow-up?
I'll go back in the queue. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I trust that you are moving us into a positive direction. We're being proactive. We're positioning ourselves to be ready, not sitting back wondering why we didn't get the grant. So we're doing work now instead of later. So, and I appreciate that. So I will support the motion. Thank you for your work, sir.
Thank you, Councillor. Council? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I'm going to vote against it. I cannot go out to citizens and have them say, so you're applying for, between 25 and $30 million worth of grants. What are they for? And I look at even just as recent as the boardwalk and the bridge. We get this grant and then we scramble to make decisions. We had a committee taking care of $300,000 worth of grants without knowing or having that as part of its terms of reference. And we had 2 weeks to turn around a decision. So I think council needs to decide what we want to do with the rec center before we do this blank slate, go out and start looking for grants. I think we have to do some work first. We've seen this project kind of evolve and change as staff came in and out, right? The last council got to a certain point with our previous CAO, then we had a new CAO come in and then it changed. And then this just keeps changing. And at some point council needs to decide what we want to see in a rec center moving forward and then work in that direction. Because right now we're applying for grants for something we have no idea what it really is and what it's going to accomplish, what the service level would be, what we're gaining, what we're losing. And I just don't think it's good governance. So with that in mind, I agree that we need to find some grants, but we need to know what we're doing first. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. So my thinking is, could we not apply? Could we not do this expression of interest and still have a conversation on the rec center while we're applying? Could we not? Somebody? It is a question. It's a question to admin.
Administration.
Through the chair to council, nothing precludes us from going as far as the expression of interest. An expression of interest does not bind us to any obligation of funding or commitment to what the building is going to look like or the option is going to be. Basically, it will tell you that you're in the running for a grant that's upcoming. It's an expression of interest, no money tied to it, no commitment. We're just ready to go.
Thank you for that, Mr. Rousseau. Councillor Race, any follow-up?
Well, my only follow-up is if we don't do it, we're not in the race. So, we're not winning, we're not losing. We are, being very proactive here. So I hope everybody considers that. We can do one and the other at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Councillor Race. If we don't secure funding and we don't make some kind of accommodations to find funding, then there's no point in discussing a project that won't happen, because ultimately the money is the gatekeeper to ensuring that the project will or won't happen. I mean, Councillor Nelson, you and I had this discussion before where you had said councils, and I think I'm paraphrasing, essentially council has to make a decision to sort of put their money where their mouth is. This is the whole point of making sure that there's funding available so that we make this project move forward. The details of what's going to fill what room, that's a design question. I mean, that's exactly one of the critiques we just made with the bridge, is that when council starts dipping down into that level of the design before determining if there's even funding available, there's just no point. And the the IPD process that's been recommended allows us to deal with that question as we're securing funding in parallel. So really, it takes care of all of our problems at once. So again, I would argue with anybody else, this allows us to take care of both of those issues, funding and what does the design look like, in a much more efficient way than waiting for one to be done so that we can move on to the other. And again, I think that's what's best for the community. And in my opinion, that's good governance, not bad.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think as I'm listening here and I'm thinking, I mean, we just, and I'm comparing it to our golf decision or potential golf decision, an expression of interest doesn't mean that we know what our golf course is going to look like in the future, but we're looking at what is potentially out there of interest to make it what it's going to look like. And I look at this very similar, and I appreciate Mr. Rousseau saying, and to also, just to clarify too, we're not securing any funding. We're not securing any funding. We're seeing what available is out there. Even if we were to apply for funding, would we even qualify for it? We'd see what kind of dollars are out there, that kind of stuff. So I think, this is a reasonable step to moving forward, seeing what is that expression of interest for grants out there. We're community looking at having, a rec center, whether it's a retrofit, whether it's a new but what does grant out there look like? What might be the future of our rec center? So I think this is a part of the process that I wish, honestly, I think we could have done a long time ago. It's never brought to the table before. And I wish we would have had this as a potential to the table long before. Maybe more movement could have been made on this project. So I'm going to be in support of this. I think it's a logical step, and I'm looking forward to see where it goes. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawes. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I think in responding to Councillor Magoon's comment about putting our money where our mouth is, we're not putting our money anywhere. We're going out to a grant and hoping they give us some money so that it makes it easier for us to put our, so, I think it's not council saying we're going to put, I'm guessing there's not going to be a subsequent motion that says, bring back a borrowing bylaw for $10 million to fund the rec center. I don't think that's coming. So we're still not putting money where our mouth is, but I have some concerns. I'm not going to get deeper into it. I think I know where the vote is going, but I would like to move to split just at the end, because I would like to support consider pursuing the integrated project delivery model. So if I could request that to be split.
We have a motion to split, and I'll give Ms. Anderson a moment to bring that up.
At the end in parallel, consider. That's the end, yeah.
And just to confirm, Councillor Nelson, that's the area that you wanted to split?
Correct, thank you.
Perfect. So if I am correct, we will deal with the first part of the motion. It will be on the floor. And then we'll go to the second part. So the first part would be that council direct administration. Council, on the first part, any further debate or questions? Councillor Race.
Thank you, sir. I do have a quick question. Are we able to debate splitting a motion?
To my knowledge, no. I'll look to administration to confirm. I can.
No, to my knowledge, no.
Councillor Race.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So council, we have a motion on the floor. Any further debate? Councillor Nelson?
So the motion, the way that I read it, allows us to work towards an ISIP grant. Does it allow us to look at other grant opportunities as well? Because the way I read it, it's specific to a single grant. Because council hasn't really made any other decisions to move the project forward, I wouldn't think administration has the tools to go and find other grants to support it.
Mr. Russo or CEO Olson?
Go ahead, Mr. Russo.
Thank you, CEO Olson, through the chair. We are able to apply for any grant that fits the criteria for recreation facilities, refurbishment or expansion. There are other grants that we could look at. There's the CFIP grant, as I mentioned in the report. That is the one for Community Facility Enhancement Program. So that's just one of it. And there's two others that escapes me right now. But the ISIP grant is the larger of it because this is the one that the feds have launched between 2018 and I think 2025 is when that window closes. And there's a certain pot of money attached to it. Just for the record, there is a conversation tomorrow across Canada for granting for this type of thing as well, and what the criteria would be. So it's very timely. Some of the staff would be on there, likely myself as well.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russo. Follow-up, Councillor Nelson?
Yeah, no, as long as it doesn't preclude, I know there's other funding announcements, like there's funding announcements coming out a lot right now, and I just don't want to make sure that administration has the room to go and look for other things if they make sense. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have the first part of the motion on the floor. CEO Olsen.
Apologies, Mayor Michaels and Council. The first part of the motion, it doesn't mention the aquatic center or the recreation center in it at all, just the capital improvements proposed. So if we can put in a modifier in there just to make sure that we're connecting this to the maybe Mr. Russo or Councilperson, assistance recreation grant readiness was what was brought forward. So it could be in line with what that motion was, recreation center, or and that would be maybe a broad term that could fit what we would be going forward with.
Yeah, recreation center.
I'll look to confirm with administration, then I'll go to Councillor Magoon to see if he's okay. Are we good, Mr. Russo, with that verbiage?
Yeah, just to add that, so base process for the recreation center refurbishment and or a standalone aquatic facility. Yeah, maybe you can just clean up my language, but standalone aquatic facility.
And I'll go to Councillor Magoon. Are you okay with that change, Councillor Magoon?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it fits within the intention of the original motion. My follow-up question for administration before we finalize the language is, might it be better to say standalone recreation facility? It keeps it a little bit more broad, and aquatic facility would certainly fall into the guise of that.
Councillor Magoon, are you okay with that change?
Well, I get yes, provided, of course, administration agrees that that fits the intention of the grant and what we're discussing.
Administration, any issues with that? Okay, seeing none. Councillor Nelson.
I'm okay, thanks. That achieved Councillor Magoon's changes to that, accomplished what my concerns were. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor, the first part. Any further debate or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. The council direct administration to pursue an expression of interest process for the recreation center refurbishment and or a standalone recreation center facility completed by fall of 2021 to ascertain if the proposed capital improvement subscribes and aligns with investing in Canada infrastructure program outcomes. Council, all those in favor? That's passed unanimously. That'll bring us to our second part. Council, any questions or debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question. In parallel, consider pursuing the integrated project delivery model to undertake. My apologies. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, it's just Mayor Michaels. If it's amenable to council to just indicate what the project is.
Thank you, and I'll go to Councillor Magoon. Are you okay with that change?
Yeah, absolutely. That's just a clarification because of the split.
Perfect. So again, I'll call to question. Well, I'll ask first, council, any further questions or debate? Seeing none, I'll call to question. In parallel, consider pursuing the integrated project delivery model to undertake the recreation center project. Council, all those in favor? And that's also passed unanimously. Council, Councillor Nelson.
So I guess where I'm struggling is I need to know what we're doing next, but I don't believe I can really make a motion to do so because we have MD 1702 and MD 1868 that talks about next steps. So how do I, as a councillor, move something forward that's already on the table and already past its deadline? Like what I want to do is make sure we're doing something in parallel, but we already have that as an outstanding motion. So how do we ensure we do that in parallel starting soon?
C. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I think part of what administration was looking for through the conversations over the last year regarding the rec center was to understand whether this still met the intention of council. There have been a number of moving pieces. If council wants to maintain what's here, then our next steps will be to follow the direction. And just as we did the Maxwell Lake Bridge project is a good example of that. There was an outstanding piece of direction from a couple of years ago that was addressed tonight. It was not lost. It was brought back once we had a little bit of a plan together. So if council wishes to leave these motions unchanged, and for administration to put together a plan to bring back something to council that follows the direction that was provided tonight, to look at IDP and how that fits, and to move this item along, that's the direction's already there. If council wishes to change anything now or rescind anything, that would be up to council to determine. But administration can follow what's here. If we need clarification or anything from council, we've been managing that through the action pending list review. So potentially taking a look with administration, having that conversation, figuring out what those next steps are if we're following the direction as it is, and those following up on those outstanding motions and bringing that information forward to council.
Thank you, C. Olson. Councillor Nelson, a follow-up.
I'll go back in the queue. I see other people have put their hands up. Thank you.
My apologies. Who else was on the list? Councillor Magoon?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And really my question to administration just was, I think Councillor Nelson has a good point. What does administration want a direction from council this evening, requesting administration to bring back the outstanding action items for review so that we can essentially pare down the ones that are, for lack of a better term, already covered, or perhaps even are contradictory, just so that we have an absolute clear direction? Is that what admin's looking for, or is admin already planning on doing that as part of this process? And then I could be wrong, and Councillor Nelson, correct me if I am. I think one of the other things Councillor Nelson had mentioned earlier in the discussion was next steps, especially as it comes to public engagement. So and he's right. I would very much like to see that captured as part of that parallel process. Otherwise, it's just, talk. So, yeah.
C. Olson?
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I think, and I apologize for kind of thinking this through in the moment as to next steps regarding the outstanding motions. Council could provide a motion for us to bring back something external to or aside from the action pending review conversations that we have been having, to review the motions that are outstanding and to discuss them, and as Councillor Magoon said, weed out the ones that maybe have already been accomplished, or maybe provide some additional discussion around what council would like to see as next steps. I think that would be fair. That's something that administration could work on. I think tonight or after this meeting going away with administration, having a conversation about fleshing these out a little bit and providing that information to council. We were bringing forward the report tonight to achieve whether or not we're ready for grants. There's still more work to do and still more discussions to be had. So if council wishes to provide that direction to bring that back, that would separate it from the action pending list process, allow us to put something together and come back and facilitate that conversation with council.
Thank you, CEO Olson. I guess one point of clarification, would administration prefer a direction, if that were to be the will, as a report or as an information item perhaps? Any advice on what format, if we were to go down that road of asking for something more formal?
I think leaving it open to a report in case there are decisions that we need of council. If there are areas where we're looking to see if council wishes to uphold or provide additional direction or clarification, an information report would be just that. It would be there would be no, I guess, analysis by administration looking for further direction from council. So leaving it open-ended like that, I think is fine. I mean, as an RFD, sorry.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Nelson.
I guess, so I don't think legislatively I can make a motion for a certain agenda or a certain existing motion to come back on a certain date. I think that's an agenda prep thing. So I guess all I would say is I would ask that MD 1702 and MD 1868 be prioritized, especially now that we've made this other motion, because I think that's kind of the limit of what we can do. And to have a decision come back on something we've already made a decision on, I like the process is challenging because these things have been so delayed, and now we've pushed another side of it forward while leaving the other things behind. So if 1702 and 1868 can come back relatively soon, because that's that parallel process we've been talking about, then great. Like to me, that's where we need to get to, but I don't think it could be accomplished by motion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, anything further for this item? Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I appreciate that, an individual councillor wants to encourage administration to bring certain items forward over, other prioritized items, but I'm not supporting that unless there's direction for it. There's a priority list already. They're all on there, and requesting it, that's fine. You want to make a motion to direct, then council can make a decision on it, but requesting something like that be prioritized over other things that are on the priority list, to me, is not an acceptable direction to give to administration without consensus of council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, we gave direction on these items already to come back before the end of March 2019 and before the end of 2019. So we've already given the direction, and that's what I'm meaning. Like I can't make another direction that changes another direction. So we've never approved an extension to those. So I'm not asking to have an individual councillor have a say on when something comes forward. We have a deadline. We haven't updated that deadline. So to me, that's where I'm kind of stuck, is how we make sure the parallel process happens. And I just don't know how to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Stashik.
Yeah, with respect, there is outstanding directions on all kinds of things. I realize that's two of them, but there's lots. So again, requesting that administration prioritize some of those outstanding items over other ones, to me, is inappropriate. And I don't think it should be considered unless it's a direction of some type. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Councillor Bew.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to try a direction to see if this helps administration. I'd like to direct administration to bring, I'll wait for Wendy. Outstanding action items regarding the rec center project? Back to council for discussion and streamlining. And then just very briefly, the idea is that some of these outstanding motions might not fit with the direction that we're going. As Councillor Ostashik and Councillor Nelson both spoke to, there may be a need to reprioritize certain ones, especially as it comes to public feedback. And I think this would be the avenue to take advantage of all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the intent of this to discuss the motions themselves, or that all of those reports are coming back?
Councillor Magoon.
No, I think, sorry, Councillor Nelson, if I may, I think the idea is that some of these are, you could say for lack of a better term, out of date and need to be dropped off the standing action list, and where others may need to be prioritized, like you had mentioned with the citizen engagement side of things. And I think this is the avenue to make that happen.
Thank you, Councillor Magoon. Councillor Nelson, was there a follow-up?
Yeah, I would just request that a date or deadline be included with it. Thank you.
Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, I'm certainly amenable to that. I think really that's going to be one of those administrative questions. When does this fit their schedule for returning it to council?
CEO Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. This is something with the other items in the queue that we'd be looking at into summer to bring back. We'd want to provide some additional information and review what's there to help council with their discussion about, as you said, Councillor Magoon, what might be outdated, what might need to drop, so we would aim to bring it as soon as we can, but if we could put a date that is a bit flexible into August, I would say, that would give us some flexibility to make sure that we don't, and if it's more straightforward than that, it can come earlier, then it will come earlier.
Thank you, CEO Olson. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, I'm fine then before the end of August 2021.
Thank you for that. And council, we have a change there. Councillor Nelson.
Try to be quick. I won't support it going that long. I'd much rather be very simple and come back sooner. Because if it waits till August to even start the discussion, and we're looking to apply for these grants in the fall, it's not a parallel process anymore. I think this could likely be achieved really quickly in a meeting and just say, hey, council, where do we stand on these things? Can we combine these two and go? Like, to me, I don't even know if it really needs a report. To be totally honest, I think it'd be quite brief and quite quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Before I go to Councillor Magoon, I really appreciate Councillor Magoon's attempt to get this forward and give direction. I won't be speaking in favor of this or really any other motion. CEO Olson spoke about moments ago, or it feels like a few minutes ago, regarding they're kind of putting this together on the fly. This was not the intent of the report. Let's deal with this at another council meeting. Let's get a weekly roundup update from our CAO. Let's reassess and then not have a broken conversation, where we're all trying to kind of narrow it down. To me, I could deal with this in a week or 2 weeks from now. We always have the right to, by a notice of motion, a discussion item. I just don't see any value in trying to piecemeal this right now, just to get certainty that we're going to clear up things that administration are already working on it. So I appreciate the effort. I just don't personally see any value at this current moment. Councillor Magoon.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. You're right. This is something that can be discussed later. I'm happy to withdraw it with the understanding that it's 8 p.m.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Councillor Magoon. Council, any objections to withdrawing? Councillor Nelson.
I just have a question. Because we seem like we're not going to go forward past 8 p.m., will this then appear on our next agenda, or are we considering this item is done?
That would be up to the will of council. At the moment, if there's no further direction, I would understand this would be done. CEO Olson, any comments to that?
thank you, Mayor Michaels. It's up to the will of council as far as what administration was seeking for direction on this report itself. We're okay moving forward.
Councillor Nelson?
So if this agenda item is done, then I will object to withdrawing that because I do think it's important that we address the things that were brought up there. So thank you.
So to clarify, you object to withdrawing it? I want to confirm.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. We have a motion to object, so I will now put to question whether we will withdraw this, and this will take just majority support. Council, there's a motion.
Point of information, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely.
If we object and we continue, or if the objection is upheld and we continue to deal with this item, that's 801. My understanding is that we automatically need to go to an extension.
Yeah, I will call that after, yeah.
Yeah, my intention is not to support the objection because the council meeting, I think at this point needs to be wrapped up and we can move on. And I don't think we need to be charging the public for the remainder of this meeting.
Thank you for that, Councillor Magoon. Council, we have a motion on the floor to withdraw this. I'll call to question. All those in favor of withdrawing this motion? Opposed? That's carried. Motion withdrawn. Council, anything further for this item this evening? Seeing none, we'll move to our fifth item. Councillor Stashik.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. I'd like to move that the short-term rental workshop MD 2169 be moved to a future council meeting as determined by the Agenda Planning Committee.
Thank you for that.
Speak to it.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty in-depth conversation. We've been here for 4 hours now covering some pretty important topics this evening, and I think this is also an important topic that has relevance to quite a few people in our community. I think it'd be better approached with fresher minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stashik. Council, we have a motion on the floor to move this to a future meeting. Any debate or questions? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? That's passed unanimously. And with that, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Nelson.
Move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Council, we have a motion on the floor to adjourn. All those in favor?